and I try to visit the jobs page, nope, now it's not going to work because it's trying to redirect me to the login page. Now, a quick note here. It's failing because Laravel is looking for a route that has a name of login. So it's not using the URL because for me, that URL is /login, but for your application, it might be /login user or something like that, or /auth. So we can fix this by returning to our routes file and giving this particular route a name. And now that'll do the trick. If I come back and refresh, it works. So just a little aside, if you want to learn more about that, research Laravel named routes. But anyways, if I switch back, how do we handle situations where, you can view all jobs or a single job, but you need to be signed in for everything else? Well, using a route resource approach, you would have to do something like this. You could call the only method and say, well, only generate routes for index and show. And for those routes, you don't need to be signed in. But if we do another one, we can do the inverse and say, for all routes for a jobs resource that are not index and show, I want you to apply the auth middleware. And that would work, but I don't really like it, to be honest. So in situations like this, I think it's actually an improvement to revert to single route declarations. And through the magic of screencasting, I'm going to do that right now. And now it's done. Okay, so consider this. Yes, it's more lines of code, but that's not the end-all be-all. We've also improved clarity in my mind. Now, I visit this file and I instantly know about every single URI that it responds to. And yes, I understand how a route resource works, but again, this just improves clarity that much more. Okay, the next upside is I can apply middleware on a per route basis. So, for example, I could say, well, in order to create a job, you need to be signed in. So I could add that to this route alone. To edit a job, and this is the main one we're working on, I could say, you also have to be signed in. However, we also want to authorize that you can edit this particular job. Okay, so we can add that as a second middleware. And in cases where you have more than one middleware, you can reference an array like this, auth. And we're going to use a new one that Laravel provides, can, : we provide the name of the gate, edit job, and then we have to pass in the relevant job. So if I use job here, I know that's a little confusing, but that's referring to whatever this wildcard is. And then Laravel, like always, is going to use implicit model binding to fetch that job and pass it to your gate. Okay, so now within a single route we've declared, in order to access it, first you need to be signed in. Second, you need to have permission to edit the job. Okay, so if I go back to job controller, that would then allow me to remove this line entirely. Let's have a look. I'm not signed in at the moment, so let's try to edit this job, and I don't even see the button. If I manually visit that URL, it redirects me to the login page. Let's sign in. And if I try again, this time I am authorized to edit the job, so it works. But let's go to one that does not work. Edit. And we get a 403. So this is working as well. And many people prefer to perform their authorization on the route level by using middleware. Now, real quick, if I switch back to the routes file, it's fine, but it's a little bit verbose. So if you prefer, you can return this to a simple auth middleware, and then we can use a method called can. Can you edit the job? Like so. Now, one thing I like about this, other than the fact that it improves readability a bit, is we have graduated this term once again, can. So now I know on my route declarations, there is a can method. On my user model, there is a can method. And in my blade views, there is a can directive. And all of those are specifically for authorization. Okay, so we're not going to do all of this together, but generally you would sort these like this, where each of them goes on their own line. And then at this point, you might want to add a bit of breathing room. Okay, so now you can repeat these calls for any other routes where it makes sense. So that would be this one and this one. But I'm going to leave that to you. You can do that as part of your homework. We won't do it together. But I will include it as part of the source code for this video. So you can have a look at that if you get stumped. All right, that brings us to our final step, which is policies. Now, real quick, policy is another one of those terms that, for whatever reason, can be confusing to people.
Yes? I don't get it.
But it's not confusing. Think of it like this. Imagine you're 15 years old and you want to visit a nightclub that is 21 and up. All right, well, you drive down, you stand in line, and when you get to the gate, there's a bouncer who holds his hand out and he says, "Sorry, buddy, it's our policy that you have to be 21 and up to enter." That's all it is. It is a policy for the nightclub. Now, in the context of Laravel, policies are connected to your Eloquent models. So let's generate one. PHP artisan make policy. And it'll ask me, what kind of policy do you want? Well, let's make one for a job. A policy for a job. All right, what model is this connected to? Well, it's connected to job. All right, and that's created in a new policies directory. Let's have a look. Let's open the sidebar, and sure enough, we have our first policy. Okay, so Laravel includes a bunch of examples here. Can you edit? Can you delete? Can you restore? Can you update? Just keep in mind, these are ideas. In plenty of situations, a single method will do just fine. So if I select all of these, I could say, well, the only one I have at the moment is edit. Can you edit a job? This accepts the user and the job, just like before. So notice this is almost like a version of a gate. It's sort of the same thing, just a different interface for it. So with that in mind, if I open up App Service Provider, let's take this logic here. I will comment this out, and if I switch back, I will paste it in here. Now, once again, just like your gate definition, this is going to return a Boolean. So if you want, you can add a return type to it. All right, so check this out. Now that we've migrated from a simple gate closure to a dedicated policy, now we can update our code. Let's go to the routes file. Back to our edit route. Yeah, at this point, we no longer have a gate or a policy called edit job. Ours is called edit. So notice we reference the method name on the policy, and then we feed it the corresponding model. So now Laravel is smart enough to know there is a link between your job model and your job policy. So now we're just saying, all right, find the policy for a job and then run the edit authorization on that policy. And this will work just like it did before. Reload the page. If I try to hit that edit endpoint, of course, I get unauthorized. Very cool. Now, further, keep in mind, if I go back to the job that we did create, this one, I don't see that button. And that's because, again, we have to update our view. Let's go to jobs/show. And yeah, once again, we no longer have a gate with this name. It's simply called edit. And I think that reads just a little bit better. So now, back to the browser, give it a refresh, and it works just like it did before. All right, and that's a wrap. So yeah, you see what I mean? There's so much flexibility in Laravel when it comes to authorization that, I don't know, sometimes it can lead to decision paralysis. Do I handle authorization in my routes file or in my controller? Do I use the gate facade or do I create some policies? And as always, the answer is it just sort of depends on what you want to do. Here's my recommendation. If you're building something relatively simple, the gate facade is fine. Open your app service provider, define a few gates, and you're good to go. For anything a little bit larger, I would 100% recommend that you stick with policies. And by the way, that's what I do for Laracast. Okay, that's it. I will see you tomorrow. Please be excited. All right, welcome back. Today, we will finally figure out how to deliver some mail. The first step is to generate what Laravel calls a mailable. PHP artisan make mail. And what should it be named? Well, let's imagine that you're an employer, and after you have published a new job to our website, we want to send you a confirmation email. All right, so why don't we say job posted? Okay, so now notice it's in a new app mail directory. Let's have a look. All right, open the sidebar, and sure enough, app, mail, job, posted. Okay, let's have a look. I think you're going to like this. It's fairly intuitive. Now, first step, if you want to send an email, you have to effectively fill out the envelope. And this is where you would provide the subject of the email, potentially who it's to, who it's from, a reply to, tags that can be associated with the email provider. And you can find a whole list of available parameters in the constructor here. But yeah, most of the time, subject, maybe reply to, maybe from, are the fields you will reach for. All right, next we have content. Provide the content for the view. So notice we return a new instance of this content class, and we pass the name of a view. All right, let's do that now. Let's go into Resources, View, and let's create a new directory for emails or mail, whatever you want. I will stick with mail. Now within here, I'm going to create a simple Blade view. Job posted.blade.php. Congrats, your job is now live on our website. And we'll leave it at that for now. But yeah, later we could embellish it, provide more specifics about the job itself, maybe provide a link to the job page. All of that is available here. Okay, so let's go back to our mailable. And now I can update this to mail.jobposted. Finally, if you have any attachments, you can provide them here. Otherwise, this looks pretty good to me right now. So I'd like to see how this email looks. How do I test it? Well, here's a cool thing. If we go back to our routes file, while we are still playing around, I could create a dummy route. I'll do it right up here. Route get, I will call it test. And yeah, what's cool is all I have to do is return a new instance of our mailable class. So if I return new job posted, there we go. That's it. It'll work. Let's have a look in the browser. Let's go to example.test/test. And there we go. We see the body of our email. Cool. All right, next up, let's send it. To send a mailable, I can use the mail facade, illuminate support facades mail. I specify who it's to. So why don't we just say Jeffrey@laracast.com, and then I'm going to send our mailable. So new job posted. And then I will say return done, just to provide some quick feedback. But keep in mind, we're still in a local environment, and we haven't yet set up any kind of email provider or an SMTP server. So that means when I send this email, it's not actually going to Jeffrey@laracast.com. It's just being logged to a file. All right, so back to the browser. Once again, we will visit that test endpoint. It says done, so now it should be logged to a file. I'll show you how to check it. Open your sidebar and head to the storage directory, logs, and you'll see by default a Laravel.log file. And sure enough, we can see the makeup and the body of our email. Notice it was sent here. The from address is the default, and I'll show you how to configure that in a moment. And then, of course, we have the body of our email. It works. Very cool. Now, check this out. If I go into config mail, as you can guess, shocker, this is where we configure our mail settings. So for example, how are we going to deliver this email? Do we just log it to a file? Do we use a specific API? Is there an SMTP server? Laravel supports many things here. Next, we can configure how we're going to send it. So here are our SMTP settings. If you want to use a dedicated SAS like Postmark, by the way, that's what I use for Laracast. Or you could use SendMail or Mailgun. There's so many. You can set them here. Next, we have the global from address. And notice for most of these, they reference an environment variable, but then as the second argument, we have a default if that environment variable has not been set. So notice mail from address, but defaults to hello@example.com. And sure enough, if I switch back, that's the default email because we didn't override it. So you have two choices. One, if we switch back to our mail configuration file, yeah, you could just overwrite that directly here. So I could say from would be info@laracast.com or something like that. Or, and this is fine, but I would say generally I prefer to configure these things from my environment file. So it looks like we have a from address and a from name. So let's go to the project root, At the very bottom, I will open .env. And yeah, we've covered this a little bit, but again, for a quick review, this is where you define all of the settings and keys for your application in the current environment. So keep this in mind. We're not going to commit this. So when you push your project up to production, you will create another environment file where many of these settings will be swapped out. So for example, in a local environment, app.env is set to local, but in my production environment, of course, it'll be set to production. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay. So anyways, if we scroll down, I can see some settings for mail. And sure enough, Laravel has already defined these. So I'm going to overwrite this. It's now going to be info@laracast.com. And from name, how about Luke? All right, that's it. So let's switch back to the browser and try to deliver this email a second time. Back to the browser, I will simply Command R to refresh. Okay. Back to our laravel.log file. And here's the second one. Now notice that we have updated the global from address. Okay. But now, I just want to make sure this is all clear. If I go back to our mailable, if you prefer, or in situations where you want to override the from address, you can set it here. So maybe in this situation, I want it to be from admin@laracast.com. And then maybe I want the reply to be different. You can override these on a per mailable basis. Okay. So one more time, refresh, switch back, go to laravel.log. Here's the third email, but this time it didn't use the global default. It used what we provided in the mailable. All right, next up, let's make this a little bit more real life. Now, there's a bunch of different services we can play around with, but one that I really like is called Mailtrap. So mailtrap.io. You can sign up for free, but I already have an account, so I will log in. All right, let's start testing. I'm going to create an inbox, and I will call it Laracast. Let's open the inbox. Now, once emails start coming in, you will see them here. But over to the right, we can see integrations, and there should be one for Laravel. And all we have to do is provide these configuration settings. So I will copy that. Back to the browser, open your environment file and the project root, and I can paste these in. Okay, so notice, let's review the difference. By default, the mailer is set to log, but now we're changing it to SMTP. The host is now sandbox.mailtrap.io. The port is 2525, no change there. We've provided a username and password. And then everything else can be the same. Okay, let's try to send that email again. And this time, it won't be logged. It will be sent to Mailtrap. Let's open a new tab, example.test/test. And notice it took a second or two. And that's because, once again, it takes a bit of time to deliver this email. And that's something you should be aware of. Okay, so if I switch back, sure enough, we have our email, and here's the body. Congrats, your job is now live on our website. Okay, so now let's integrate some real data. I want to learn information about the actual job that was created, as well as a link to view the job. So let's do this. Within my routes file, I'm done testing, but I want to reuse this section here, so I will cut it for later. All right. Next, let's go into Job Controller, and after we publish a new job, right down here, we can deliver that email. So I will paste it in. And then, of course, we will clean up and import those. Okay, mail to, but now I'm still hard coding my own name, which doesn't make sense. We should send this email to the person who created the job. But you'll remember, a job belongs to an employer, and the employer belongs to a user. So if I switch back, what we could do is say, save this to a variable, and then update it to job, employer, user. So notice in this case, I could say give me their email address, but Laravel's pretty smart. If we feed it a user instance, Laravel's smart enough to grab the email address off of that object. All right, next I should import this as well. And then I will pass in the job instance to the constructor of our mailable. Public job, like so. Now here's a really important thing to understand. Inside of your mailable class, all public properties are instantly available within your view. So here I'm injecting it and setting it to a public property, but also I could do something like this, foo equals bar. So in this scenario, inside of my mail.job hosted view, I will now have access to a job variable as well as a foo variable. So if you have situations where you don't want it in your view, then of course you would need to make it protected. Okay, so what about situations where you do want to inject a job, but you don't want to pass the full job instance to your view? Well, again, in these situations, right down here, and as the second parameter, I can set width equal to an array of values to pass through. So yeah, this would be an alternative way to do it. If I want to send only the title of the job, I could say this job title, and then I would just make sure right up here that when I inject job, I make it something that is not public. But yeah, in our case, I'm fine with passing job to the view. So I will get rid of this entirely. And now let's update the view. Job posted. Why don't we wrap all of this within a paragraph? We'll have a link here, view your job listing, and then I will set the href to jobs/job ID. But keep in mind, when the user receives this email, they're not on your website, so you need to provide the full URL. We actually want example.test/jobs/job ID. So in these situations, you can update it to URL to jobs/job ID. Yeah, if we command click here, that will generate a URL for the application. And you'll see what shape that takes shortly. Finally, maybe at the top, it's not going to look super pretty, but maybe within an H2, we will have the title of your job. All right, and I think that's enough for an example. Let's send the email again. All right, back to our project. I will need to log in. All right, John will create a new job. Laracast video producer, pays $90,000 per year. Save it. That will persist it in the database. Notice it took a second or so, but I can see it here. And now if we switch back to Mailtrap, sure enough, we have a confirmation email. But yeah, sure enough, we have the title of the job. Congrats, your job is now live. View it. And if I click on it, notice it takes me to that full URL to our project. And by the way, what's useful about that is URL will work for your local environment as well as your production environment. All right, so that's a wrap for our mail lesson, at least mostly. Now, you'll remember I kept bringing up the fact that it does take a bit of time to deliver an email, and in a production environment, that's even longer. So yeah, if you think about it, it's just not practical to make the user wait 2, 3, maybe 4 seconds for an email to send.
I'm waiting!
When, on top of that, they may not even know you're delivering them an email. They're just publishing a job. They don't know that as part of that request, you're also preparing and firing off an email. So yeah, we don't want to do this. So we can improve performance by instead throwing the email onto what's known as a queue. And if you don't know what a queue is, then of course you're in luck, because that is the topic of tomorrow's lesson. So I'll see you then. All right, folks, we are officially moving on to day 25. So within Job Controller, if I scroll down to my store action, in the last episode, we did learn how to send an email, which is great. But one problem is, well, at the moment, it's all happening synchronously. Or in other words, we are making the user wait for however long it takes to deliver this email. So if it takes maybe 2 seconds to deliver that email, then the user has to wait 2 seconds for a response. And I get it, 2 seconds isn't a very long time to wait, but on the other hand, as it turns out, it's an extremely long time to wait. So, yep, this just won't do. Instead, it would be nice if we could take that job, and in this case, the job is delivering an email to you, and we're just going to throw it into the background. All right, we'll get to that in just a minute. But for now, I want to immediately respond to the user. All right, let's figure out how to do that. All right, so I'm going to close this out, and our first step is once again our configuration directory. And you can see we have a config file for our queues. Now, as it turns out, there are a variety of services and backends to assist with your queues. And we can see a list of supported connections here. So sync, that's synchronous. That means run the job as part of the current request, sort of like what we've been doing already. But this can be useful for testing or local development. Next, you can run your queues using the database driver. And believe it or not, I think this is a good way to go for a long time, maybe longer than you think. But otherwise, if you need something a little more robust, you could reach for Beanstalk, SQS, or Redis. Okay, so let's see. Right up here, the default queue connection is in fact the database driver. But notice it's looking for a queue connection environment variable. So if once again you go into environment, let's scroll down to queue, and yeah, you could rewrite this to whatever you want to use. So if you want to support Redis or SQS, you can swap it out here. For now though, I'm going to stick with database. All right, let's switch back to config. Now, if we scroll down, here are the various connection settings for the driver we choose, in this case, database. And you'll learn more about some of these options in the future. But for now, notice the table section here. So of course, if you're going to use a database driver, then you need some place to house or contain all of your jobs while they're being processed. And right now, that table is called jobs. And a migration for that table comes with the Laravel out of the box. We've already seen it in Table Plus. All right, let's keep going down. And yeah, there's some sections here for queue batching, how to handle failed jobs. And once again, for a database driver, it's going to look for a table called failed jobs. And again, we already have access to that. So if I switch back to Table Plus, here is the queued jobs table. And then we also have a failed jobs table that comes with Laravel out of the box as a migration. You can review it here. Let's go into database, migrations, and it should be this one here, create jobs table. Yep, you get this out of the box. Okay, so all of that to say, if I return to job controller, when it comes to mail, it's really easy. All I have to do is change this send method to queue. So now I'm saying, no, don't deliver this email as part of the current request. Instead, I want you to throw it onto a queue. Okay, so I'm going to explain that more in just a second, but why don't we try this out? To the browser, I'm signed in as John Doe. Let's create a brand new job. How about Laracas instructor? And this one pays, how about 70,000 USD? All right, let's submit that. Now, we've created that record in the database. We can see it here. But what about the email, the confirmation email? Well, let's switch over to Mailtrap, and my inbox is empty. Let's do a sanity check. Refresh. Do it 3 times for good measure. Nope, no email. So what is the problem here? All right, I'm going to try to explain this in a simple and easy to understand way. But in order to do that, I got to tell you a story. But don't worry, I'm not 80. It's not going to take 20 minutes. It'll only take a moment or so. Okay, so a really long time ago, when I was in high school, I worked at a copy and printer place called Kinko's. It was eventually bought by FedEx, and today it's known as FedEx Office. But yeah, way back then, it was known as Kinko's. Okay, so my job was cashier. So a customer would come in, and they'd say, hey, I need 300 copies of this flyer, and I would be responsible for that. However, when that job, and that's kind of a key word there, the job is making 300 copies of the flyer. When that job would come in, yes, I could have walked around to the copy machine and performed that job for them. But think about it. The customer would have had to wait for me to complete that job. I go over to the machine. Maybe somebody's using it before me. I wait for them. I then perform the copies, and then I return to the customer and I say, all right, here you go. A second possibility, though, is I say, okay, 300 copies, and I hand it to a person whose only job is to make copies. I hand it to Stan. Stan, can you take care of this for me? And immediately after I do that, I churn back to the customer and I complete their order. All right, so you know what we did there? That was a real life queue. A job came on and I threw it to a queue. And in this case, that queue was the table right behind me, where Stan, another worker at Kinko's, can be exclusively responsible for knocking out those jobs. Oh, and by the way, that term worker, it's another keyword. All right, so you see what I mean? You already know what a queue is. You already know what a job is. You already know what a worker is because you see it in your everyday life. So the problem is we've thrown a new job onto this queue. Hey, I need somebody to deliver this email for me. But if I turn around, there's nobody working in the back. There are no workers at the moment. So let's fix that. Open your terminal and run php artisan queue work. Aha, notice processing jobs from the default queue. All right, and sure enough, we had a job to deliver an email. All right, let's switch back to the browser. Come back to MailTrap, and there we go. Open our email, and everything works just like before. Pretty cool, huh? So yeah, if you intend to use queues, then you also need to have one or more workers to work on the queue. And that's exactly what this queue work command does. All right, so that means, when you push your project up to production, you will need to run this command behind the scenes. And don't worry, there are dedicated tools and services to help with this. For example, there's one tool called Supervisor that will ensure that no matter what, this queue work command never falls over. It's always running behind the scenes. All right, so let's do this. Let's switch over to my routes file. And once again, I'm going to build up a test route just so we can play around with a couple things. So when we're done, I will return done. And I want to play around with dispatching a job. Because, of course, in real life, you will be doing much more than delivering an email. There will likely be a variety of processes and actions you're performing that take a bit of time, especially these days when there's so much interaction with AI. So first step is the dispatch helper function. This is really cool. We call this a queued closure. So why don't we just say, for now, log to a file, hello from the queue. All right, so as we learned in a previous episode, logs will be added here. Storage logs laravel.log. And let's clear this out. All right, so let's give this a run. But before I switch to the browser, I'm going to close out this queue work command just for illustrative purposes. I can close it out with Control-C. All right, so back to our demo project. I'm going to go to example.test/test. We get return done. So now we have dispatched a job. But once again, if I switch to my editor, we don't see anything, just like before. So I'm drilling this into you. That's why I'm doing it 2 times now. Think about it. We dispatched a job. The job was thrown onto a queue. And if it helps, just think of a queue as a stack of papers. And each paper represents some kind of job that needs to be performed. The only problem is there's no worker to handle those jobs. So nothing happens. All right, let's get to work. Think about it. You're the nasty boss who says, get to work.
Get to work!
And they start working. All right, so they run this queued closure. And if I switch back, now we see the log. All right, so this is really helpful. If I come back to my routes file, sometimes you want to trigger a bit of logic that happens outside of the current request. But it's fairly basic, and you want to perform it inline. You don't want to complicate things. All right, so in situations like that, the dispatch helper function is a great way to go. And you can even do cool things, like I can delay this. So I could say, delay it for 5 seconds. All right, let's give that a shot. I'm going to close this out. I already have my queue work command running, so I don't have to restart it. And if I switch back to the browser, let's give it a refresh. If I come back, notice 1, 2, I'm switching away to make it refresh. 3, 4, 5, there it goes. So we dispatched a job that was delayed by 5 seconds. And this can be really helpful. For example, if you want to send a welcome email 15 minutes after the user signs up, that would be one way to handle that. All right, but anyways, let's head back to our routes file and discuss dedicated job classes. Now, I'll switch back to the terminal and hit Control-C. One thing I could imagine doing is, what if after an employer publishes a new job, we take care of translating it to a dozen different languages. And maybe we want to use artificial intelligence to handle that task. Well, we can definitely do that, but once again, it takes a bit of time. So let's instead throw that job onto a queue. I'm going to run make job. What should the job be named? Well, how about translate job? Okay, so now it'll be placed within a new app jobs directory. Let's have a look. Let's go into app, and sure enough, you have a new jobs folder, and there we go. All right, so we see a bunch of traits here. Mostly you can ignore those, but of course, each one adds just a little bit of behavior to interact with the queue, for example, or to serialize your eloquent models when they are added to the queue and retrieved from the queue. But anyways, for now, all you need to know is this handle method is where your job logic will be triggered. So for example, if I just wanted to once again say logger hello from translate job, I could do that. And you know what? This is a great way to learn. So let's give it a shot. I'm going to go back to my routes file. And this time I'm not going to use a queued closure. I will dispatch a dedicated job. I'll do that by referencing the name of the class, translate job, and you'll see that I have a dispatch method. So let's run that now. We'll give it a refresh. And then, of course, from the terminal, I will start my worker, get to work. And now if I switch to my log file, sure enough, we do see hello from translate job. All right, super cool. All right, so back in my routes file, yeah, it doesn't really make sense, does it? To dispatch a job, and by the way, I will clean that up, to dispatch a job, but then provide no indication as to which job we are referring to. And yeah, we're getting a little inception here.
I didn't get inception.
We have two different concepts that have the same name. We have a job listing for our application, and then we also have a queued job. So granted, a little less than ideal for a tutorial, but you get it. Okay, so anyways, we're going to fix this by tracking down a job listing from the database, and then I will pass that into the dispatch method. And let's clean that up. Okay, so now our job listing will be passed to our job class. Yeah, even as I say this, it's confusing, but yeah, that's just how it turned out. All right, so I will inject this. Public job. But as I do this, we can see my editor is squawking. And again, that's because we're colliding a little bit with our queued job interface. So as it turns out, if I go up a level, it looks like there already is a job property here that refers to the queued job rather than the job listing. So why don't we just rename this to job listing here? All right, so now, yeah, at this point, you would reach for whatever AI service you have. Maybe if you have an AI class, you could call a method like translate, and then you would reference your job listing. We only have a title here, but yeah, in real life, you'd have something like a description, and then you'd provide a list of languages that you want to translate that to. So for example, maybe if we're just translating it to Spanish, this could be our API. But yeah, the entire point is this is potentially a long-running process that should not take place as part of the current request. So instead, we locate it within a job, and then we dispatch that job onto the queue. For now, we will simulate that by saying log translating this job listing title to Spanish. All right, and let's give it a run. Give it a refresh, and now return to laravel.log. And actually, I forgot to mention this. This is a really good error that we can discuss. So notice it's still displaying the old value, hello from translate job, instead of our new version, which you see here. All right, so what's the problem? Well, keep in mind, whenever you run this queue work command, it loads everything into memory. So since we loaded it into memory, we have changed the logic for our job, and it's not yet reflected. Okay, so this means whenever you make a significant change, you should restart your queue worker. And yeah, once you push to production, you will set that up as part of your build or your deploy script. Make sure you restart your worker. So run it again, and this time, if we give it another try, back to my editor, open laravel.log, and sure enough, we can see, all right, we are translating the lawn service manager job to Spanish. It works. All right, so that has been your introduction to queues episode. So yeah, I hope now terms like queue and job and worker aren't quite so scary anymore. I don't know, I find that in the early stages, we are all masters at terrifying ourselves when it comes to terminology. But yeah, if you can just find a real world corollary, what's the right word there? Correlation? I don't know. If you can find a real world comparison, it instantly makes sense, don't you think? All right, so let's be done with that. In the next episode, I want to introduce you to Vite. I'll see you then. All right, let's move on to the front end. So the topics of the day are asset bundling and Vite. Okay, so asset bundling refers to taking all of the assets in your application, whether they be images or style sheets or JavaScript files, and it will bundle them up in such a way that they are now ready and, more importantly, optimized for production. Okay, so as it turns out, Vite, at the time of this recording, is easily one of the most popular bundlers on the market. And of course, Laravel has support out of the box. So I'll give you a crash course. Within your project, head down to your package.json file. And yeah, very similar to your composer.json file, this is where you can declare dependencies for your front-end tooling. And you can see out of the box, Laravel suggests Axios, Vite, and the Laravel Vite plugin. All right, let's go ahead and install those. Oh, and real quick, keep in mind, you will need to have both Node.js and NPM installed. So if those are new things to you, don't worry. Just visit nodejs.org and run through the installation steps. It shouldn't take long. To see if you have these installed, of course, run node-v as well as npm-v. All right, let's use npm to install our npm dependencies. All right, and it looks like it added 23 packages. We're all set to go. Okay, so our next stop is vite.config.js. So we're pulling in that Laravel Vite plugin, and we are defining our input. And it looks like we have one CSS file and one JavaScript file. And you'll see that they are located in your resources directory. All right, let's have a look at CSS, since that's a little bit easier. Why don't we say, for the body, I want the background color to be red, just something very bold and clear. Okay, now I want to reference this file. But notice it's actually not within my public directory that would be accessible from the web. It's in the resources directory. So we will need to compile this, and here's how. If I quickly head back to package.json, you'll see that we have two scripts here, one called dev and one called build. And they're very simple. They just defer to Vite commands. Okay, so from the terminal, I could run npm run dev. All right, and now it's running. But real quick, notice that the app URL is set to localhost. Now it's pulling this from your environment file. So here's what I'll do. I will hit Control-C to exit out. And if I switch back, let's go into our environment file. And yeah, right up here, I'm going to update this to our local app URL, which is example.test in this case. Okay, so now if I run it again, you'll see the app URL is correct. So now if I switch over to the browser, yeah, I don't see any red here, do I? Well, of course not. We defined it in that style sheet, but we haven't yet imported it within our Blade files. So that's the next step. So back in our editor, let's go up into our views directory. And of course, we could place this within our layout component. I'll do it right here at the top. Now, Laravel has a Vite directive that makes this really easy. All I have to do is reference that root app.css file, and it'll take care of the rest. All right, and now we get red. Perfect. Okay, so next I want to show you hot reloading. This is just a fun term that means whenever you make a change to a script or even your style sheet, the browser will automatically reflect that without needing to manually refresh the page. Here, let's switch layouts to make it a bit more clear. Background orange, save, it instantly refreshes. Background black, background green. Pretty cool, isn't it? Okay, so this will work for your style sheets, but it also works for your JavaScript. Back to vite.config, we specified an entry point as resources.js app.js. So you will find that here. All right, so this is what Laravel suggests out of the box. Maybe import a bootstrap file that does anything you need to bootstrap your front-end dependencies. In this case, because making AJAX requests is so common, Laravel will assume, maybe you probably want to pull in Axios and provide some initial configuration. All right, so let's do, some hello world stuff here. Let's alert hello from the JS. Save the file. All right, and now, of course, we need to reference it, right? So we can do that once again from our layout file, and we can reuse this same Vite directive, resources.js app.js. All right, so immediately when I save this, the browser should update. So if I switch back, all right, and there we go. So now we are bundling up both our CSS and our JavaScript files. All right, so yeah, let's talk about Tailwind now. Up until this point, we have been referencing it through the CDN. And that's great for demos, but yeah, for real-life production deployments, you don't want to do that. So now that we understand Vite, or at least a little bit of Vite, why don't we solve that problem? In your browser, visit tailwindcss.com, and let's go into the docs, and down to installation, and let's choose a framework guide, Laravel. All right, so we already have a Laravel project. Next up, we need to install Tailwind, PostCSS, and AutoPrefixer through NPM. Open a new tab and run it. All right, there we go. So when we ran Tailwind CSS init, that creates yet another configuration file within your project root. Let's have a look right down here. And there we go. Brand new file. All right, let's switch back to the docs. All right, step 3, configure your template paths. Yeah, so we need to teach Tailwind about our project. Where can we expect to find any Tailwind utility classes? Well, maybe in a Blade file, maybe in a JavaScript file, maybe in a Vue file. If you use React, then you would update that as well. All right, so let's switch back, and I will paste that in here. All right, easy enough. Next, we want to add the Tailwind directive to our CSS. All right, let's do it. app.css, and I'll swap out that background of green with the Tailwind directives. All right, finally, start our build process and begin using Tailwind in your projects. Yeah, it's as easy as that. So in the terminal, I will Control-C and start it up again. And now, if I visit our layout file once again, yeah, I can remove this script entirely because now Tailwind will be available through this file here. Let's head back to our project, refresh, ignore the alert, and we get exactly what we had before. Great. So now we can configure Tailwind however you need to. And yeah, this isn't a Tailwind specific course, but of course you can visit their documentation to learn more. So maybe I have a custom color for Laracast or something like that. I could say extend and add to colors one called Laracast, and I will make that equal to this blue shade that you see right here. Okay, so now let's come back to our JavaScript real quick and comment this out so we don't keep seeing an alert every time it refreshes. And if we visit anything we want, how about job/index? Yeah, maybe right here. We will take the job title and I will use my new class, which is text Laracast, as you see right here. All right, let's switch back, go to jobs, and there we go. And actually, in this case, it's a very similar shade to the text blue 500, just slightly different. All right, so what else? Well, something you might want to consider is at the moment in your vite.config file, we are providing 2 inputs. And that works, but if you're building an SPA, a single page application, what you might want to do instead is omit this and instead import your CSS directly from your Bootstrap file. So if I were to come back to javascript.app.js, I could then import our style sheet. So let's go up a level into the CSS folder and grab app.css. Okay, so if you want to take that approach, of course, return to layout, and let's make sure that we remove that CSS file. Okay, so now we are exclusively importing the JavaScript file that will then import the CSS. And yeah, this is a very common approach when building a single page application. So now if I switch back and refresh, yeah, we still get the same thing. Okay, so keep in mind, one is not necessarily better than the other. It just sort of depends on what kind of application you're building. If you're working on a fairly traditional server-side app with Blade files, then I probably would keep those 2 entry points. But yeah, if it's instead a full SPA, keep it all in the JavaScript file. Okay, so now to wrap up, if I return to our package.json file, there is a second script called build. This is the script you will run to prepare all of your files and bundle them up for production. So if I hit Control-C from the terminal, I can say npm run build. And yeah, notice it doesn't set up a watcher here. It's a one-time thing, and it builds them for production. So notice we have a compiled CSS file and JavaScript file that have been zipped up and compressed as much as you possibly can. Now, what's cool about this is we don't have to change anything. That vite directive is smart enough to detect whether we are currently in a local hot reloading environment or if we're in production. So now if I switch back and refresh, yeah, nothing changes except for the fact that now our project is primed and ready for production. All right, good work, and hopefully most of that made sense. Yeah, just keep in mind, asset bundling as a whole is a fairly complicated topic, and here we've only grazed the surface. But you're now on the path, right? And when you need to learn more, you can do so. But yeah, you know what's funny? I think you'll be surprised how what we covered in this video is going to take you a long way. It'll cover 85% of what you need to know. It's pretty surprising, and that's a testament to the Laravel team and how useful that Vite plugin ends up being. Okay, so moving on, we got to stop somewhere, right? We're now at episode 26. We've covered a great deal of the framework, not nearly all of it, but a great deal for a beginning series. So next up is our final project. And I'll warn you, we're going to go a little bit quicker than usual. I'm not going to stop at every single line to explain it. You're expected to understand the basic concepts. But I hope you'll enjoy it, and you'll get to see how I would generally go about starting a brand new project. So I'll see you then. Please be excited. All right, everybody, the moment is now. The time has come. We have to start working on our final project. Oh, and by the way, you can tell it's the final project because I have a brand new spiffy wallpaper to mark the occasion. Okay, so before we get started, a couple ground rules. First up, there's no way around this. We're going to go much faster than we did in previous videos. But hopefully, if I did my job properly, it's not going to feel that fast because you've already reviewed each of these concepts. But yeah, we can't get around it. If I stopped after each line to explain it, we'd be here for 4 or 5 hours, and we got to get this done. Okay, ground rule number 2. With that in mind, here's your job. If you're watching a video and you didn't understand a particular piece or why I did this or that, your job, and for the benefit of everyone else, your job is to leave a comment, mark the timestamp, and then ask your question. So it might be like, hey, Jeffrey, at 3 minutes and 52 seconds, I didn't understand why you put this return type there. Can you explain more? And I'm going to monitor these comments for a long time, and I will do my best to answer each of your questions. Okay? So if you're watching a video and you don't know what's going on, well, maybe head down to the comments and somebody has already asked your question. All right, that's it. Let's get going. Now, we will start like we always do. Laravel, new, and the name of our fictional jobs platform is called Pixel Positions, so that will be the name. All right, no starter kit in this case, even though Breeze would give us a head start. It removes some of the learning opportunities, so we will start from scratch. I will use pest. Yes, I will initialize Git. I'm going to use SQLite, and let's cd in there. All right, let's review this in the browser, and we're all set. All right, let's head over to Zeppelin. Now, here's the layout that Adrian whipped up for us. It looks pretty good and should be fairly easy to create the markup for. Now, of course, you don't have access to this, but I think the only thing we need here is the logo itself. So I will make that available within the GitHub repository, and I will also link to it within the comments for this video. All right, I will call it logo, and I will save an SVG. Now, you'll see I'm already within my project, so I have a couple of choices. I could create an images directory within my public folder, or if I want Vite to automatically version and hash any images we have, and that would help with cache busting, by the way. In that case, I could put it within a resources directory. So let's do that. Let's open this, create a new folder called images, and then I will save it here. Cool. So let's switch over to our editor. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is set up my general layout. So within the views directory, I will add a directory called components, and this one will be called layout or app layout, whatever you want. Let's do layout. All right, let's add some initial boilerplate. We'll call it pixel positions. And then let's see, if I switch back to Zeppelin, yeah, it looks like I have a navigation area at the top and then our main section below it. All right, so we'll have our wrapper, a nav section at the top, and then our main section below it. And for now, I will put our slot there. Okay, so now within the nav, it looks like we have 3 sections, right? An area for the logo, an area for the links, and then a section to post a job. So let's create 3 divs. First up, we'll have our logo, then our links, and then finally post a job. Okay, so first up, if I want to reference this logo.svg file within my resources folder rather than public, we have to load it and access it a bit differently. Here's how. Open up our image tag, but first, this should be clickable, right? So let's add it within an anchor tag. And then as the source, I will open up PHP, and I'm going to reference the Vite facade. Now, this is the full path, but actually it's made available globally as an alias. So I can just do this. And I'm going to reference an asset. Okay, so now all I have to do is reference the full path to the image. In this case, resources, images, logo.svg. And that's it. Okay, so with that in mind, why don't we go ahead and run npm run dev. npm run dev. But right now we're getting vite command not found because I haven't yet installed my npm dependencies. Let's do that now. All right, one more time. There we go. It's up and running. Next, I'm going to, at the very top, reference our resources.js app.js file. And now, well, let's access this in the browser. So here's what I'll do. I'll go to my routes file and let's open welcome and delete all of this and replace it with our new layout. All right, let's switch to the browser. Give it a refresh. So sure enough, it doesn't look great because of the white background, but this is our logo. And if we inspect it, sure enough, we can see it being referenced properly. All right, but here's one thing to be aware of. If I switch to the terminal and I instead build this for production, have a look. I come back, reload, and unable to locate file in vite manifest. Okay, here's how we fix that. Go into your resources.js app.js file. And right here, I'm basically going to tell vite about our images directory. So I can say import.meta.glob. So I'm going to provide a regular expression here. So I'm going to say my images are within the, go up a level, go into the images folder, and then grab everything within there. And I want that made available and ready for versioning. Okay, so if I come back and run this again, this time, if I come back to the browser and refresh, it works. Okay, so that is something to be aware of, only on the condition that you need versioning and cache busting. So take a look at this. If I inspect the element, notice that it appends a unique URL to the logo. And again, this is entirely for the purposes of cache busting, so that your assets can live as long or little as they need to. Okay, just an aside. Let's head back to our layout. For now, it's going to link back to the home page, and then let's work on this. Switch to Zeppelin, and I see links for jobs, careers, salaries, and companies. So first one is jobs. Next, we have careers. Next one is salaries. And last up is companies. And we'll probably change this a little bit later. Okay, finally, we need a link to post a job. So we'll have post a job, and we'll leave it at that. All right, back to the browser, give it a refresh. All right, but now, of course, I want to line these up properly. I could use Grid or I could use Flexbox. So with that in mind, I next want to pull in Tailwind. TailwindCSS.com, Docs, Framework Guide, Laravel, and once again, we will follow the steps. I will copy this, run it. All right, next, we will update tailwind.config, and that file should now be available. It is. Paste that in. And yeah, we're just providing paths to files that we want Tailwind to inspect for utility classes. This way, the compiled CSS file is as small as it can be. So we're not using view here. I can remove that entirely. Cool. Reformat, and that looks good. Next, update our entry points, and then run npm run dev. Cool. So resources, app.css, paste that in. And then finally, if I go to my layout file, we can reference that as well. Or like you learned, we could alternatively import our CSS directly from our app.js file. But for now, we'll keep them separate. Cool. npm run dev, and now Tailwind is available to us. Okay, so on the nav, I'm going to set a display of flex, and then I will say justify between. And that should push this one all the way to the right, this one to the left, and this in the middle. Let's switch back to our project, give it a refresh, and there we go. Cool. Next, why don't we align the items to the center? Items center. All right, cool. But next, everything is right up against the edge of the window. So right up here, why don't we set some padding on the left and right of 10? And why don't we switch to a 2-up layout? And yeah, that'll save us some time. All right, next on the nav itself, yeah, if I said a background of red or something, let's give it a little padding on the top and bottom, a bit of breathing room. And next, on the body itself, I want it to be a black color. So I could set class of BG black, like so. And yeah, now we can at least see the logo a bit better. We'll also set the text to white. But if I switch over to Zeppelin, I believe it's not an exact black. Let's select this, and it looks like this is our black color. So here's what I'll do. I'm going to open up tailwind.config.js and extend our colors, and I'll say black should actually be this shade right here. Now, Tailwind should update behind the scenes. So check this out. If I were instead to set it to red or something like that, you can see now anywhere that I reference text black or background black, it will now use this value rather than the default. But yeah, let's bring it back. All right, anyways, back to layout. And on the nav, there should be a border. So I'll set border B, but that white is a little too strong. So I'll show you a little tip. You can set a border white, but then lower the opacity. And this is useful if you don't have a specific color, but you want it to be a percentage of a color. I could do something like this. And that means white, but set the opacity or the alpha to 10%. And that's what I want in this case. All right, cool. Next, on the nav links themselves, why don't we add a bit of breathing room in between them? So I can use space X6 to add a bit of space between each of the items. Next, I know I want these links to be bold. And then for the main content itself, I want to push it down from the nav area. So let's add a class of margin top of about 10, and that'll push it down. All right, next, let's switch to Zeppelin and see how long this should be. It looks like we have a maximum width of 986, about 1,000. So here's what I'll do. I'll say maximum width, and if I want to use a custom value, I can type it in here. So why don't we say the maximum width you can be is 986 pixels. All right, cool. So I have a little more work to do here for the layout, but I think we can switch over to our welcome view and get started on the main section for the home page. Now, if I switch to Zeppelin, have a look here. I can see a few blade components we'll need to create. For example, what you see right here, that is a repeating theme where you have a little square. It could be a certain color and then a heading. So I see it here. I see it right up here. I see it for all of the headings, actually. That's something that should probably be a component. Next, the styling for these buttons all seem to be the same. And then we have styling for a job card and then an alternate styling for like an expanded job card. Okay, so I'm filing these away in my head. All right, so let's do this. I will begin with one section at a time, top jobs. Okay, so with that in mind, let's wrap it within a section. We'll have some kind of heading that I'll say top jobs. And then within a div, it looks like we're going to have 3 job cards. Okay, so we'd have something like this ultimately. But for now, I'm just going to work on the first one. So within a card, it looks like we'll have 3 individual sections. One for the employer name, then a section for the title. I'll hardcode this for now, video producer, and the salary, full-time from $60,000. Finally, at the bottom, we will have a list of tags, something like this. And let's create 3 of those. Finally, I will have an image for the employer's logo. But with that in mind, I should probably wrap these tags within a div so that I can push them to the left and the logo to the right, like you see in the image. Now, temporarily for the image, I'm going to use a placeholder service. I think there's one called placehold.it, and then I provide the dimensions, and it should be 42 by 42. All right, and that should be enough to get us going. So let's switch to the 2-up layout. Okay, so let's start by giving this some padding all around. How about P4? And then a background color. So if I make it crystal clear, you can see what we have here. Okay, but instead I'm going to make it more subtle. How about a background color of white at around 5%? Yeah, just very subtle. Let's make it rounded. All right, and then I'm going to set a display of flex. Oh, but that doesn't change anything. Oh, you know what? I think I have an extra div by accident. All right, reformat. There we go. Okay, so now I want to adjust the direction. Let's do flex call. So it's top to bottom. And then I want to center almost everything, excluding just a couple parts. For example, the employer should be self-start. So that should be on the far left. And while we're here, let's make the text just a little bit smaller. Next, for this section, let's give it a little bit of padding. So PY maybe 8. I want it to be bold. And then down here, yeah, we're going to do the same thing. Let's set a class of flex and justify between. And maybe align the items to the center. Very good. And then just to be safe, I'm going to set margin top to auto. Now, I don't think it'll make a difference in this case, but in situations where maybe there's more margin to be had, it'll force this section to be at the very bottom of the card. Okay, next on the section heading, why don't we give it a margin bottom of 6, something like that, just to push it down. And then let's do this for our tags. So I'll start with just one. I'll add a class of background white. Again, I'm just using alpha here to make it a little quicker for us. About 10%. Let's then add some padding on the left and right and the top and bottom. Let's make it rounded. And I want the text to be fairly small. So let's use extra small there. All right, but now what about when we hover over it? Well, we could say, well, when you hover, set the background to 25% maybe. That looks good, I think. And by the way, a little tip, I know we don't have much breathing room here, but if you want to transition those colors a bit more cleanly, you could say transition colors and then set a duration of about 300 milliseconds. So now any colors will have more of a smooth transition. And I don't know if you can see that in the video, but it's definitely smoother. Okay, so now think about it. I could do 3 of those, and that looks a little better. All right, what else? How about the employer logo? That should be rounded. And that's a little hard to see right now, but later that'll be a full image. Okay, so this is enough to extract a component. So let's do this. Let's open our sidebar, and within our views directory, let's add a brand new component, and I'm going to call this job card. All right, so now I can select all of this and move it over. Cool. So let's swap it out. X job card, and let's create 3 of them. Okay, back to the browser, and yeah, now we're repeating that. But notice there's no spacing in between them. Let's fix that. We'll wrap all of these within a div, and then this time I will use a grid. We'll say for large devices, we want grid calls 3. Next, I want a nice little gap in between them. So we'll set, it's basically padding in between each of the job cards. Yeah, it's starting to take shape. But now notice how everything is right up against the left edge. I think we can fix that by returning to our layout, and on the main section, let's make sure the margins are set to auto. And yeah, now that pushes it to the center. Now, I know that ultimately we will pass in a specific job data, but for now, we're going to leave those static. Okay, next, why don't we update this into a section heading, because I know we will reuse it. So let's create one, and I called it section heading. That's good enough for me. Paste it in, and then this will be our slot. But now I'm not sure if I can always assume the margin there, so maybe that will be applied elsewhere. All right, so with that in mind, I can do margin top 6 and then remove this entirely. Okay, X section heading, and this will be, what did we call it? Featured jobs. Back to the browser, and that works. Okay, now I can add our little square. And that should be fairly easy. Why don't we do a span here? And I'll give it a width of 2 and a height of 2, so it's a perfect square. Maybe a background color of white. And then I don't want it to be an inline element. Let's do inline block. And let's see how that looks. And yeah, that's okay, but maybe we should change this up. Maybe this will be wrapped within its own div, and then we'll have a span followed by the H3. Yeah, if I take that approach, then I could do something like inline flex, items center, and I can even add a little bit of a space in between the square and the heading itself. Let's have a look. Yeah, and I think that looks pretty good, actually. The only tweak might be the heading should be bold and a little bit larger than the regular text. And there we go. We have our section headings. Cool. So now if we switch back to welcome, yeah, we have one section for our featured jobs. We could have another section for, what would this be? Our tags. And then another section for our recent jobs. Switch back, and there we go. Now, clearly we need a little bit of space in between each of these sections. So in situations like this, what you can do is wrap all of it within a root. And then I could apply something like a space y of 10. And that way there's an equal amount of space in between each of the children, as you see here. All right, next up we have our tags. We're going to do this very quickly. So we've already created a tag. So this too should be extracted into its own component. Tag.blade.php. Paste that in. This will be our slot. Okay, so now I can swap these out with X tag. Now again, keep in mind, we want these to be configurable, so ultimately I would probably pass in a tag, but we haven't gotten to that point yet. For now, I'm keeping this all static. All right, so now back to welcome. Yeah, right here, I could have one of these, and then let's say YY9P. Let's have around 10 of them. All right, switch back, and yeah, that looks okay. Now, once again, they need a bit of room to breathe. So we'll say, once again, MT6. And I'd like to add a little space in between each tag. So how about space X1? And that's what we get. And then, yeah, these tags probably need to be a bit larger. So it sounds like we should have two different sizes of tags, maybe extra small and then a base size. Oh, and by the way, I put this in the wrong section. So let's fix that. You were waiting for me to fix that. Like so. All right, so I think we made pretty good progress here, but we're going a little high on time. So in the next episode, we will work on the expanded job card. And by the way, if you want, why don't you get a head start and see how your version compares to mine? Okay, so we're going to wrap up there. Again, I know we're going fast, but that's the way it's done. In the next episode, we will finish up our layout so that we can then begin working on the architecture itself. So I'm going to take a break, and I will see you in the next episode. All right, welcome back. There's no time to waste, so I'm going to jump right in. If I switch back to Zeppelin, yeah, we currently have one job card, but right down here, we have a second version. And while we could figure out a way to consolidate both of these styles within a single blade component, often it's just easier to create two separate components, and that's what I'm going to do. So let's go to job card, and if I open up the sidebar here, I will duplicate it, and we'll call this one whatever you want, job card wide. How about that? All right, so let's see. We should work left to right. So first up on the left is the image itself, the employer's logo. Next, we'll have a div that wraps the employer's name, and then the title and the salary requirements. So I should be able to get rid of this, and why don't we change this to some kind of anchor tag? And actually, we're going to talk more about this at the end of the video, but basically, how can we have multiple anchor tags within a card while still allowing the card itself to be clickable? It's a little bit tricky, but I'll show you how to do it. All right, so we have the employer name, the job title, the salary, and then finally on the far right, let's just display the tags for now. And we can come back later if we have a little more time, but I'm trying to be as quick as we can here. All right, that's the general shape. All right, so of course there's more to do, but let's see this in the browser. So here's our main welcome page where we have the tags and then the recent jobs. I'm going to grab this div here, and we'll have a new one, this time for job card wide. All right, and why don't we do 3? But this time we'll have space between them vertically. So maybe, I don't know, space Y3. All right, let's have a look. So we come back to the browser and whoa, we have a gigantic image. And this is probably related to Flexbox. It's always Flexbox. So let's fix it. I can command click here. And yeah, one thing you learn if you've used Flexbox for a long time is you want to be careful about things like images or buttons that are direct children of a Flex container, which is what you see here. You always end up with weird issues. So for example, if I just wrap this within a div and switch back, yeah, we've solved that problem there. Okay, but yeah, it still doesn't look great because we are using flex call. This time we want a flex of row, and I don't want the text to be centered. There we go. All right, next up, let's tweak some of the spacing. So I'll start by saying in between each of the flex items, let's add a gap of about 6. And then with that in mind, if I switch back to the welcome view, I'm going to increase the space, the vertical space in between each of the wide cards up to 6, a little more breathing room. All right, come back, and yeah, that looks a little better. All right, next, I want this section itself to flex, expand as much as it can, and that will push the tags to the far right. So back to our wide card, and we'll say right here, flex 1. Flex to fill the available space, or shrink if it needs to. All right, good. Next, the employer logo is a little bit wider than 42 pixels. I think it's 90. Let's double check. Back to Zeppelin. And let's see, I can click right here, and sure enough, 90 by 90. Save it. Switch back, and yeah, that looks better, but that blue is killing me. So you know what I'm going to do? I'd rather reference an actual image, or at least a dummy image. So I will use a different placeholder surface, and let's see if I can remember it. It's picsum.photos, and I believe, once again, I can just pass the dimensions here. There we go. Now we have a random image, but notice it is repeated for each item there. Ideally, I want them to be unique for each job. So there is a way to do that. I believe we pass seed and then some kind of identifier. So then the image pick some photos returns will always be unique to that ID. So if I come back and refresh, well, they're all using the same identifier, so we see the same photo there. So all we have to do is make it unique. Once we have actual jobs in the database, we will reference the ID of the job. For now, I'm just going to say, give me a random number between 1 and, a massive number. Now, if we come back, we have some unique images there, and that's fine for a demo. All right, back to Zeppelin. Next, we have this gray text. Now, I happen to know the hash is C2, 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 but let's see if Tailwind has something close. Let's go with gray 600. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Maybe 700. That's too much. How about 400? You know what? Close enough for me. I'm not going to squawk. Okay, so while I'm here, notice the font is different from what we see on Zeppelin. So as it turns out, this pixel positions demo is using the same font that we reference on Laracast, and that comes directly from fonts.google.com. So here's what I'll do. I'm going to visit our layout file, and at the very top, I will save us some time and just paste it in. And all of this is, again, coming from fonts.google.com for this font here, Henkin Grotesque. Is that how you pronounce it? And we're getting a handful of weights if we need them. Cool. So now I want to reference this within Tailwind. So here's what I'll do. I'll open our tailwind.configuration file, and I'm going to extend the font family object to include a new one. We'll call it Henkin Grotesque, and then I will reference a font tree. So ideally, I want that font we pulled in with a fallback to sans serif if it didn't load for some reason. Okay, so now, once again, Tailwind will reload, and I can now reference this as a utility class. I'll show you. Let's go into our layout file, and let's set it site-wide on the body. So I'll say font Henkin Grotesque, and let's see it in the browser. There we go. Looking good. All right, so let's continue with our wide job card. Job card wide, and of course, the title itself should be bold. It should be large. And then for the paragraph, this is going to be very similar. I also want it to be small and gray. Okay, so if we switch back, that's looking fairly good. But notice how everything is grouped at the top. Ideally, I want to push the salary to the bottom of this section down here, like you see in the image. So maybe we should do this. Maybe once again, flex to the rescue. Let's set a display of flex, but I want it in the direction of a column. And then for this last item, I will set margin top auto to push it down as much as it can go. And now, that looks better. All right, next, the title could probably be a little larger, and I want to push it down from the salary. So how about push it down, margin top of 3, maybe? And then let's change it to text extra large. That's looking reasonable. Okay, now let's move on to some other miscellaneous things. At the moment, we have 2 different versions of our employer logo, but of course, we want to consolidate them. So this once again sounds like a good use case for a dedicated component. So I'm going to copy this and create a brand new one. We'll call it employer-logo.play.php, and I'll paste that in. And again, don't forget, ultimately, we will update these components to accept, for example, the employer object, and then we will reference it. But for now, once again, everything is static. All right, so let's update this with our new component, employer logo. And then I will switch to our standard job card, and I can update it here as well. Employer logo. But now we do have one issue. You'll remember if I switch back, the width in this case should be 42, but within our component, it's set to 100 by 100. So now we have messed up our layout, as you see there. Okay, so why don't we do this? Let's accept a prop, an initial prop for the width. And that will default to 90 pixels, but if you want to override it, you can. Okay, so then I can swap this out with the width. And I believe if we just provide a width, it will be treated as a square. So we wouldn't have to do a height or something like that, duplicate it. We should be able to provide just one and it'll work. Okay, so now back to job card, I could say width is, 42? give that a shot, switch back, and now we have 2 different sizes for our job cards. All right, next up, I'd like to do a little more work with the tags. They don't look that great. If I switch back to Zeppelin, let's zoom in a little bit, and we can see this text is actually very small. If I open the sidebar, I can see it is set to, about 10 pixels. What do we have currently? I'll go to Computed and look for font size. It's set to 12. Okay, so that's extra small, and I don't think Tailwind goes below that, so why don't we create a custom size? Back to our Tailwind configuration file, and let's override font size. And we'll have, how about, if we already have an extra small, let's do 2 extra small, and I want this to be 10 pixels. I could hard code this, or I could set it in rims. So if I do some math, let's take 10 pixels divided by the base font size, and we get 0.625. All right, let's use it. Back to job card, actually into tag. And let's see if we can update it to text to XS. Come back. And now it's just a little bit smaller. All right, let's keep going. I would like this to be bold. And maybe we should give it a little more padding on the left and right. All right, back to Arc, and that's looking pretty good. Okay, now I'm thinking our font might be a little bit too heavy. So if I compare this to Zeppelin, notice that here, even for the navigation area, the font is set to bold, but it's much softer than what we currently have in Arc. So let's do this. Let's go back to our layout file. And why don't we remove both 800 and 700? We'll stick with 400, 500, and 600 weights. So if I switch back, that's much softer than it was before. All right, next up, you'll see that we have some hover styles if your mouse is over a card. It looks like the title goes blue and the border is blue. So let's go into Job Card, and we can say, by default, we have a border, but maybe we hide it. Let's make it transparent. But you hover over the card, and we make it border blue. And again, I'm just going to eyeball it, maybe 800. Come back, and close enough. All right, but now I want to make the title blue as well. So how do we do that? Well, you can't just add hover styling to the H3, because then you would only see the blue if you hover over the H3, and that's not what we're doing here. So a way to solve this with Tailwind is to apply a class of group, and then on the H3, you can listen for when an element with that class is hovered over. So I could say, for example, if you hover over the group, meaning this parent element, then I want to set the text for this to also text blue 600. And I think that will solve the problem. Yeah, cool. So actually, real quick, while we're here, if I switch back to Zeppelin, you'll notice that the salary is pushed down a little bit and much, much smaller. I want to fix that pretty quickly while we're here. So for the title, let's make it bigger, like XL. And then for the salary, we will make it maybe small, and then I will push it down a little bit. So I'll set some margin top to push it down from the title. Come back. Yeah, better, but the salary is still too bold. Let's see. Oh, that's because we applied it to the div. Okay, let's apply it only to the title, and then the salary itself can be a base level. Yeah, and that's looking a little better. Okay, but next I would also have to apply those border styles to the wide card as well, and that's not ideal. But let's just see what that would look like. Notice I'm doing a bit of duplication here, which is a sign. So let's go to Job Card Wide, and I'm going to paste those styles in here. And then for the video producer, group hover, text blue, 800. You know what? I think I used the wrong ones here. Yeah. Notice I have 600 and 800 up here. We want those to be consistent. Okay, so now if I hover over it, that looks good. Or maybe it's too dark. Maybe it should be 600, but we're not going to get stuck in the weeds here. You get the idea. Now, once again, if you want to transition these, so it's a nice, smooth transition from transparent to blue, do this once again. Set transition, colors, duration, and let's make it really long so you can clearly see it. So come back and, the title isn't quite right, but notice the border is definitely transitioning in. Yeah, I guess I forgot the title has to receive the same thing. Transition colors, duration, and this time let's make it much quicker. 1/3 of a second often seems to be a good value to go with, 1/3 of a second or 300 milliseconds. Yeah, if you like that, it's just a little bit smoother. Okay, so once again, we'd have to do the same thing for the job card wide. This feels kind of gross, doesn't it? Then right down here, the exact same thing, and now that works as well. It's not the end of the world, but it seems like we could have more than one card. Well, we already do, but in a real pixel positions application, we could have many cards that have this styling. They're almost like panels, or you can call them cards if you want. I often call them panels. So with that in mind, could this be a candidate for a component? Let's give it a shot. Create a component called panel, and I'm going to use a split view here. Let's take the wrapper here, and then we can have a slot like so. All right, let's see how that looks. If we took that route, I could swap it out with our X panel component. So now we've effectively consolidated all of those styles. So let's see how job card wide looks. Yep, no difference. Good. Next, I can go to job card, and we're going to do the exact same thing. However, I want to make sure, is there any unique classes here? So did we duplicate the classes? Here, I'm just going to paste this in. Yeah, we actually have a couple differences. And yeah, that would be the flex information and the gap. Okay, so that should be excluded. All right, let's do this. I'm going to change this to X panel. There we go. And then I'll get rid of everything except for the unique parts. So it sounds like the unique parts are that within the panel, we want to display a flex. So get rid of, yeah. And then if I click through to panel, this is unique to job card wide, so I don't want to assume it, but everything else should be the same. All right, so job card wide, pass these in. And then, of course, we've learned if we want to merge these, well, we would have to do something like this. And I'll show you a little shortcut. So up until this point, we've been saying attributes merge, and then we set the default class like so, and that would do the trick. However, if we just call attributes as a function, it's going to merge it. So this is sort of a shorthand for attributes merge. And yeah, that would work. Also keep in mind, if you want, you can do things like this, where you could open up PHP blocks, like this, and then you could say default classes, or keep it even simpler, classes. Now you can reference that variable within your template here. So you could do something like this just to make it a little easier to consume, right? Especially on a low resolution like I have, those utility classes go off the screen very quickly. So this is an option if you want. All right, so back to Arc. And yeah, notice now we have the exact same thing as we had before, but we have consolidated those stylings within a panel component. Pretty cool. So now, for example, if we go back to welcome, if we were to add a new section for something totally different, I could open up a panel and say, hello there, whatever you want, and you'll see it will receive those same styles. And yeah, it seems like that's a repeating pattern for this site, so it makes sense to extract it into its own component. Let's get rid of it. All right, so now, yeah, these tags are way too small. They're fine for a job card, but if I switch back to Zeppelin, yeah, you can see they're much larger here. Okay, so it sounds like, we should make this configurable. Let's go into tag, and yeah, let's do this. Let's accept a prop for the size, and maybe we'll accept like a base or normal. How about base? But also maybe a small size or something like that. Okay, so then we could do something like this. Open up a PHP block, and we could say, well, if size is base, then use these classes. But if the size is small, then use these other classes. Okay, so let's figure out what our base class is here. We'll do the exact same thing. At the top, I will have our CSS classes, but then, yeah, the text size and the padding should be unique based on the size. So how about if the size is small, then I will append to classes, and I'm just going to grab these here, all right? And then what else? Text to XS. So those are the classes that are unique to a small size, at least so far. Clean that up. Okay, now I just have to figure out what the classes should be for the base level. And I'm just going to eyeball it. Maybe text small, and then I will increase the left and right padding to 5. And yeah, maybe that's enough. By the way, notice I am including a space so that when we concatenate, they aren't grouped with the previous class there. Okay, so now I'm going to reference them. And yeah, that would be one way to handle this. All right, so our default size is base. So if I switch back to arc, yeah, those look good now, but these are now too large. So we just switch back to job card, and I will update these to say, all right, set a size of small. And then I will create 3 of those. All right, and let's even update these to look a little more real. Backend, front end, manager, something like that. There you go. We have our small tags and our larger tags. All right, back to Zeppelin. Last up, well, we'll still have some form work to do later in the series, but all I want to do to wrap up this video is add the section at the top. Let's find you a great job followed by an input. Back to welcome. This will be its own section at the top, and it's not a standard section heading, so it's more of a banner. Let's find your next job. I already know it's going to be bold and maybe pretty large. How about 4XL? And then below it, I want a form. So we will handle the logic for the form later. But yeah, within it, we'll have an input type of text. We'll give it a placeholder to give you an idea of what to search for. How about web developer? And then for the classes, well, let's see. If I zoom in, all right, so we have a dark gray background. There's a border. It's rounded. There's a good bit of padding there. All right, let's see if we can make this work. Make it rounded. Let's set a background color of, again, let's use alpha. How about background of white, but only at 5%? And that way I could do a border of white at 10%, so just a little bit larger. And then we know we want a good bit of padding on the left and right and the top and bottom. It's a pretty large input. All right, let's have a look in Arc, and yeah. So next, let's align it to the center. And you know what? Maybe, can I just set text center to the section itself? Yeah, that looks good. Let's make the input wider. So, how about set width to full? Yeah. And actually, just in case on your screen you're not seeing this overly well, let's increase it temporarily so it's crystal clear where we are. All right, we want to push it down. So let's say class MT6. And then it's a little too wide, so we should set a maximum width. Now, Tailwind includes a handful of maximum width classes. I'm not sure which one to do. Typically, I would just eyeball it. So here's large, here's extra large. Extra large looks pretty good to me. Okay, finally, if we check Zeppelin, it is pushed down just a little bit. Let's do, well, we already have spacing in between, don't we? So I can't set margin. Let's do this. How about padding top of 10? Yeah, and that pushes it down. And then also we should push, let's find your next job down from the navigation area a little bit as well. So maybe, I don't want PT10, maybe a little bit less, PT6. And yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on this because we have a lot of Laravel specific work to do. Although this is Laravel specific, you know, we are working with Blade components and refactoring things and figuring out how it works with utility classes and stuff like that. And yeah, I think this is looking pretty good. Okay, so let's bring this back to background white of 5. And yeah, clearly there's a lot more tweaking we could do in real life. I'm sure there's a bunch of hover styles and focus styles we've missed. But again, for a demo where you're working along, I think this is pretty good. All right, so very good job. Yeah, I don't know what the deal is, but in my head, whenever I have videos like this that are almost exclusively HTML and CSS based, I feel like the programmers among you are thinking, come on, fast forward. This isn't what I signed up to Laracast for. Move on to the next part. I don't know. Maybe that's not true. Maybe some of you enjoy watching it. But either way, it doesn't matter because we're done. In the next video, we're going to do a lot. We're going to build up the whole architecture for this project. So that means we will be generating eloquent models. We will whip up seed data and factories. We'll work with relationships. I will introduce you to testing. There's a lot to do, and I hope we can pull it off. So yeah, that's it. I will see you in the next video. Stay tuned. What? pull to show outro. All right, everybody, welcome to day 29. Whew, we're getting close. 2 videos to go. And if you want me to be frank, I'm getting a little stressed out because we have so much to cover. All right, so like I said at the end of the last episode, we are mostly done with the front end portion. We still have to construct a form later, but yeah, most of the boring stuff, quote unquote, is all done. So in this video, we will move on to the architecture of the application. Now, I know already that it's an employer who will publish a job. So I'm going to start with a migration to create that table. Create employers table. All right. Create employers table. And yeah, let's see. An employer has a name. That'll be a string. They have a logo. So we will store a path to that logo. And then also an employer belongs to a user, right? A user signs up, they create an employer, and it is the employer who publishes the job. All right, let's do a foreign ID for a user. And of course, we can clean this up. All right, let's migrate the database. PHP artisan migrate. All right, so we have 3 tables that Laravel ships with out of the box, and then our new employers table. If I switch to Table Plus, let's open it. It's an SQLite connection. I'll give it a name and the path. So here's our app. It's going to go into database.sqlite. Save it. And yeah, now we have our new employers table. Okay, so while we are here though, yeah, jobs and job batches and failed jobs. You'll remember throughout the course, because Laravel has a concept of queued jobs that kept interfering with our concept of a job listing. So yeah, I don't want any interference. So what I'm going to do is change these default table names. Go into your config directory down to queue, and let's have a look. I'm just going to look for table. Yeah. So for the database connection for our queue driver, the default table name is jobs. So why don't we change this to queued jobs? Or again, we could store this directly within your environment file. All right, let's do another table search. Yeah, job batches. We didn't really go over this. It's a slightly higher level concept, but nonetheless, I'm going to use the same convention here. It will now be called queued job batches. And I think there's one more. Yeah. So if a queued job runs, but it fails for some reason, it needs to be stored, right? So that we can reference it later and retry it later. So that table is called failed jobs by default. Now it's going to be queued failed jobs. All right, so now we just have to update the migration itself. So this is the migration that Laravel ships with, create jobs table. And yeah, let's start by renaming it to create queued jobs table. And then I will update the table names. Queued jobs, queued job batches, and then finally queued failed jobs. Okay, let's refresh our migrations. PHP artisan migrate fresh. And now, if I switch back to Table Plus and give this a refresh, all right, now, yeah, there won't be any interference whatsoever with our job model. Okay, so let's do this. We did this in 2 steps, didn't we? We created a migration for the employers table, and now I'm going to create a model for the employer. But don't forget, if I do help on make model, we can generate these things all in one go, including the migration, including a factory, including a controller. Or if we pass the -a flag, it makes a migration, the model, the seeder, the factory, the policy, the resource controller, and a form request. Yeah, there's a lot here, but it really does save a bunch of time. Okay, but anyways, because we already created the migration, this time let's build the model, and I will select the ones that I need. So -c for controller, F for factory, -s for a database seeder, and then I also want a policy. Cool. So now we get 5 files with a single command, which is pretty cool. Okay, next up, let's focus on jobs. And this time we'll do it all in one go. PHP artisan make model job -all. And yeah, now we get all of these files for free. And yeah, keep in mind, if it turns out that there's one maybe form request that you're not going to use, just hit the delete key. No problem there. All right, so let's go into our migration, create jobs table. And let's see, let's think this through. To publish a job, we need to provide the title of the job, right? What's the job title? Next, what is the salary for the job? And once again, we're going to be pretty generic here. I don't want to deal with currencies and stuff like that. So you can provide whatever you want for that field. All right, next, another string. What is the location for this job? Is it remote, or do you have to be in Winter Park, Florida? It just depends. So you need to specify that. All right, next, what is what should we call this? The type of work. Is it full-time or part-time? And maybe type isn't the right term. Maybe schedule? That's not quite right either. Why don't we go schedule, though? It could be full-time or part-time, and we'll set a default of full-time. Yeah, if you want, this could be an enum, but I don't know. Sometimes that's a little annoying to work with on the database level, so I will skip that. All right, next up, when you publish a job, you need to provide a link to your actual job details page. Believe it or not, that's how it often works. You publish your job to some kind of aggregate platform, but then it ultimately directs you to your own website where you provide more details. So this will be a URL to the actual job listing. And then, well, here's another thing. I don't know if we're going to implement this, but yeah, you could imagine allowing users to pay more to have their job listing featured at the top. So we need some way to determine if a job should be featured or not. So with that in mind, let's make that a Boolean. It'll be featured, but the default is false. And then finally, the relationship. A job belongs to an employer, right? So let's set a foreign ID for the employer. And then once again, I will import that. All right, that looks good to me. Let's migrate our database. Back to Table Plus, give it a refresh. Now we have users, we have jobs, and we have employers. Very cool. So now I'm going to set up those relationships. Let's start with employer. An employer belongs to a user. So return, this is a belongs to relationship, and then we reference the associated model. And if you want, you can add a return type or you can omit it. Just depends on what system you want to follow. All right, now let's do the inverse. So in this case, the user is actually like the representative for the employer. So it's not a belongs to relationship. It's actually a has one relationship. So a user has one employer. Like so. All right, next, let's switch over to job. So what are the relationships for a job? Well, as we discussed, a job belongs to an employer, right? Of course it does. All right, next, once again, let's do the inverse. If I have an employer instance and I want to see all jobs associated with that one employer and no one else, well, let's do that. Jobs, and this is going to be a has many relationship. An employer has many jobs. And again, if you want, you can add a type here. Just make sure that you import it at the top here. Now, real quick, we're making good progress, but I do want to introduce testing at least a little bit. It's a tricky thing. Testing is a key component to building applications these days, but for a beginner level course, it slows things down dramatically. But nonetheless, we want to discuss it at least a bit. So I'm not going to write tests for this entire project like I would do in real life, but we'll write some to give you the general approach. All right, let's do that now. So let's do this. Before I can write some tests, I first want to flesh out my database factories. So let's go into factories and build these out. All right, so let's see. An employer has a fake name. It has a fake logo. So let's see if there's some kind of image URL. Yeah, I think that'll work. And then finally, an employer belongs to a user, right? So let's reference a user factory. All right, that's done. Now into job factory. And a job has a title. So I believe Faker has a job title property, which is pretty cool. They have a salary. And here's what I'll do in this case. This is a cool little tip. There is a random element method where you can pass an array, and Faker will just choose a random item from that array. So for example, you could say 50,000 USD, like we've been doing, 90,000 USD, or 150,000 USD. So now every single item will be one of these three. All right, next we said location. I'm just going to hard code that to remote. And also, that's an important thing to realize. It doesn't always have to be random fake data. If you need to hard code it, that's fine. It doesn't matter. Next, we have schedule, and we'll set that to full time. Or again, if you want it random, use random element. Next, we need a URL to the job listing page on the employer's website. So we'll do fake URL. Is the job featured? We're just going to always set it to false unless you override it. And then finally, the relationship, employer ID. So we can say employer factory. All right, so let's clean that up and we're all set. Okay, so now we can write some tests for this. So let's come down into phpunit.xml. So keep in mind, even though we're using a test framework called PEST, PEST is a wrapper around PHP unit. So that's why we can visit a phpunit.xml file to configure how PEST is going to behave, because PEST is just deferring to PHP unit. It's a wrapper. Anyways, you can see some of these environment variables that are set. These are like overrides when you're in a testing environment. So I'm going to set up the database connection to also be SQLite, but I can set the database itself to not be a file, but instead memory. And you won't always reach for this, but for small little projects like this, it's going to be perfect and super fast. Next, notice other things like sending mail or dealing with queues. All of that is effectively turned off. We don't actually want to deliver an email when we are performing a test. We just want to assert that an email was sent. So in these situations, we use the array driver rather than SMTP or postmark or something like that. All right, let's create a test. PHP artisan make test. I am testing my jobs. And now what kind? Feature or unit? This can often be confusing. Think of a feature test as testing a wide spectrum of your application, like this. When I visit such and such page, I expect to see that. Or when I make a post request to this controller, then validation should occur and I should see such and such in the database. Think about it. That's testing a very wide range of your project versus a unit test, which is far more narrow. When I instantiate this class and I call that method, then I expect such and such in response. And how narrow that ends up being differs based on the community. So for example, would testing an eloquent model that hits the database, is that a unit test? Some people say absolutely not. I say, sure, who cares? But again, just make up your own mind. In our case, we are working with quote unquote unit tests. Okay, so let's open that up. It will be within your test directory in unit. And now we have our new job test. Now, we already have an example here. Expect true to be true. Nice and readable. Let's run it. PHP artisan test. Okay, so we have the example tests that Laravel ships with. And if we want, we can go ahead and delete those. Or just the one for unit for now. And the one we care about here is our job test. And of course, it passes. But if we change this, expect true to be false, of course, that's going to fail. So if I run it again, now we get red. All right, let's review a few examples. Let's say a job belongs to an employer. So I could say test, it belongs to an employer. But as it turns out with PEST, we can use this function name of test, or we can use an alternative alias, which is it. And you can switch between those based upon how you want to write out your tests. So notice I'm saying test that it belongs to an employer. That's great. Or I could say it belongs to an employer. Both do the exact same thing. So how would I check this? Well, and this is usually a 3-step process. We often call it arrange, act, assert, AAA. Like this. Begin by arranging the world. Create the world in order to run your test. Next, act. Perform some kind of action. Finally, assert. What did you expect to happen as a result of that assertion? All right, so I'll show you an example. It belongs to an employer. How do I arrange the world here? Well, if it belongs to an employer, then I probably need an employer to perform this action, right? Let's use a factory for that. Employer, factory, create. All right, next we are using it. It refers to a job, but I don't have a job currently. So let's do that as well. Let's say job equals job factory create. Now, when I run this, it is true, it'll set up its own relationship to an employer. But for this particular test, I want to be a little more explicit. So if I ever want to override anything declared within the factory, then I pass that as an array to the create method. So in our case, I want to override employer like so. Okay, and while we're here, let's clean things up. All right, so now step 1, arrange is complete. Next up, perform an action. So this is where I interact with the code base in the way that I want. In our case, job, employer. Okay, so often your action and your assertion will be separate, but in this particular case, we can group them into one. Act and assert. All right, so I could say expect job employer to be this, like you see here. So here's what we could do. Job employer is employer. We learned about that method many episodes ago. I expect that to be true. So yeah, if the is method is new to you, it's checking if what you pass here is the current instance. So that will either return true or false. In our case, we expect it to be true. All right, let's run our test. PHP artisan test, but it fails for a confusing reason. A facade root has not been set. All right, so ultimately what's happening here is the Laravel framework hasn't really loaded because this is being treated as a sort of raw, naked unit test. But I do want to interact with Laravel and Eloquent in the database. So if I go into the pest.php file, this is sort of like the configuration file for your tests. And right at the top, you can see use this root parent class in the feature directory. Now, you can think of test case almost like Laravel. It makes and bootstraps Laravel for you. And you'll also see this commented line, refresh database. And what this means is after every test completes, Laravel will refresh and reset the database so that you can start with a clean slate. All right, so these things will be active in the feature folder right here, but I also want them in my unit folder. And yeah, this goes back to how different people have different ideas for what a unit test should encompass. In my case, I'm pretty loose with it, so I'm going to use these two parent classes or traits within the unit and the feature folder. All right, now if I run it again, it passes. Perfect. So it passed, if I switch back, because we have already set up these relationships. So if I go into job and we hadn't yet written this, we would run the test, it would fail, and at that point we could write the code in order to make it work. And this is referred to as test-driven development. Yeah, I find that test-driven development can be a little confusing to newcomers, but it's actually not so bad, especially with Laravel these days. Think of it like this. You start by writing a test where you interact with the world, and in this case, the world is your code base. You interact with the world in a way that is ideal to you. Next, you run the test, but of course, the test is going to fail, right? You haven't written any of this code in real life. You're in La La Land. You're saying, wouldn't it be great if this worked? But of course, it doesn't. So the test returns red. It fails. So the final step is write the code to make the test pass, and then rerun the test. It returns green, and you rinse and recycle. It's a nice way to build applications. It's not for everything, but in certain scenarios, you're really going to love it. Anyways, if we return this code and run the test again, it passes. Now, I do want to show you at least one example of this TDD approach. So how about a post can have tags? That can be useful. So how about it can have tags? All right, let's follow arrange, act, assert. Create the world. Well, to start, I want a job. So job, factory, create. All right, next, act. So interact with the world in the way that would be ideal. So if I want to attach a tag to my job, maybe I could even call a method like tag. Job, tag it with front end or something like that. Finally, assert. Assert that this worked the way I would expect. Maybe something like this. I would assume on my job model, I would have a tags collection. And maybe I could say, well, I expect that collection to have one item. So I could say to have count 1. And I'll reformat. Yeah, why don't we start with that? All right, so let's come back and run our tests. And of course, it fails. There is no method called tag. All right, let's implement that. Job, tag. All right, so we fixed that particular error. It said no tag method exists, so we run it again. And now we have changed the error. And this is a key part of test-driven development. Make the error change. And that is a signal that you are, in fact, making progress. Okay, so now we tried to grab a collection, but of course that returns null and it's not working. Okay, let's do that now. We will have a tags relationship. And why don't we just stub it out for now? Let's return an empty array. All right, it fails, the error changes, and now, job tags must return an eloquent relationship instance. Okay, now we can get to work. Let's make a model for a tag. And I don't know if we're going to get around to building a controller for it, but I do want a factory and a migration. All right, so let's go into create tags table. And this is very simple. A tag consists of a unique name, like front end, back end, manager, project lead. And actually, for now, I think that's fine. All right, now let's go into tag factory and set this up. A tag factory has a name of any kind of fake and unique, so I will add that classifier name, and that will be fine. All right, so now I can go into job, and let's update this relationship. So does a job belong to a tag? Well, that would signal that the tag owns the job, right? And no, that doesn't really make sense. What about the inverse? Does the tag belong to the job? Well, sort of, right? If I had a tag called front end, that could belong to this job. The only thing is, it could belong to more than one job. It could belong to 10 different jobs. So it's non-exclusive. Okay, so in these situations, we want a belongs to many relationship, and we'll create a pivot table to allow for that. All right, so our relationship is belongs to many. A job can belong to and have many tags. All right, so we have a tag eloquent model. We have a job eloquent model. Next, we need an intermediate table. And this table will include the job ID and the tag ID. And it'll do that over and over. That way, one job could potentially have 100 different tags that it is associated with. Let's create a migration. PHP Artisan, make migration, create job tag table. All right. All right, so we want a foreign ID for the job, right? And then we want another one for the tag. And for both of these, why don't we say constraints, create a foreign key constraint, and then cascade on delete. And we've already reviewed both of these. This just means if, in this example, if the tag is deleted, then cascade and also delete the record within this pivot table as well. Okay, PHP Artisan migrate. So now I have a new tags table and a job tag pivot table. All right, so we've done some work. I'm now going to return to job test, and let's see how we're doing. PHP Artisan test, and it still fails. Failed asserting that actual size 0 matches expected size of 1. Well, at least we are making progress. Let's go back into job, and let's see. That relationship is working, but right now the tag method doesn't do anything at all. So let's update this. If I accept a tag name here, we'll call it name. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. I'm going to reference the tag model. So I'm going to say, give me the first tag from the database table that has this name. Or if you couldn't find one with that name, create or persist one in that table. So I'm going to say the name is name. All right, does that make sense? Give me the tag from that table, and if you couldn't find a tag with that name, create one, and then give me the tag. All right, next, I'm going to interact with my pivot table. I can say this, tags, and attach a new tag here. Just like that. All right, finally, these squiggly lines, my editor just wants return types. Again, these are optional depending on how you like to build your applications, but we could import these and simplify. All right, let's run our tests again. And it fails, but I want you to notice right here, check this out. Add name to the fillable property to allow mass assignment on tag. So notice when we take this approach, it almost feels like the tests are telling you what the next thing you need to do is. And that's one of the huge benefits to this approach. All right, let's go on to tag, and we could update the fillable property, or I'm going to go into App Service Provider, and I'm going to disable that feature entirely, like we've learned about in past videos. So I can say model unguard. All right, run it again, and now we get green. How cool is that? We haven't yet opened a browser, but now we know that a job belongs to an employer, and it can be associated with any number of tags. All right, let's be done with tests. That's all we can get done here. Let's go into our routes file. And all we have right now is the homepage route. Let's update this. When you visit the homepage, that will load our new job controller and an index action on it. All right, let's open that up. And this can still load our welcome view, though we should probably change that, shouldn't we? So let's go into resources, views. I'm going to have a directory called jobs, and then a view called index.blade.php. And what I'll do is I'll take everything here and migrate it over, and then I can delete welcome entirely. All right, back to job controller. Now, as you can imagine, and let's update this, we would need to pass jobs to our job listing page. And I'm also imagining that we need to pass a list of tags. So let's do that one as well. All right, let's keep it very simple. We can now reference our job model and say, give me all of them. Though, of course, as we've learned, in a real project, we would want to paginate them. But for now, a select star is fine. We'll do the exact same thing for our tags. Okay, let's go into our view. And you'll remember that, in the last episode, everything was static. We're just hard coding all of these. But now we can swap them out. Let's begin with, how about tags? We can say for each tags as tag, then render this blade component. But now I want to pass in the associated tag, like this. Tag equals tag. Or a little tip in situations like this where your parameter name and the variable name are the same, if you prefer, you can actually do this. This is just sort of syntactic sugar that achieves the exact same result. All right, so now within tag, I also need to accept the tag. And now I will swap out the text here with the name of the tag itself. Next, we haven't set up an endpoint, but the href would probably be something like tags/tag name to lowercase, maybe. Yeah, but we haven't set that up yet. Okay, let's go back to jobs.index. So we've updated this one here, but also we reference tags within the job cards, don't we? This should be easy. Now we know a job can have tags. For each job tags as tag, then reference the tag. All right, let's copy this and then also switch back to job card wide. And yeah, we have this one right here. Get rid of this, and the size can be the default. All right, let's view this in the browser. Yeah, of course. I jumped ahead of myself. So within job card, we're referencing a variable called job that was not defined. Of course, each of these need to be updated to now accept the job. So here's job card wide. I will then go into job card and paste that in. And then within our job/index view, we can pass these in the exact same way. For each jobs as job, pass it in. All right. And then I'm going to do the same thing up here, but do note this is the feature jobs. So we will need to tweak this in just a little bit. But yeah, let's just get to a point where the page loads. All right, come back, cross our fingers, and the page is loading. Now you'll notice, of course, we don't see any tags or jobs because we don't have any yet. So this is where database seeders come into play. We'll go into database seeders, job seeder, and let's do this now. So yeah, this is sort of like a whirlwind tour of the entire course up until this point. Job, factory, let's create, 20 of them. Create. Now, keep in mind, this will work, but it doesn't account for tags. So here's what we'll do. I'm also going to say tag factory 3 create. So I'm going to create a collection of 3 random tags. And now I'm going to call a new method you haven't seen called hasAttached. And of course, this is for belongs to many relationships. I want to attach these tags to each of these jobs we generate. So now every single job will consist of these 3 tags. All right, let's go to database seeder. I will create our dummy user. That's fine. And then we will call our job seeder. All right, let's give it a shot. PHP artisan db seed. If I come back to table plus, now we have a bunch of employers, we have a bunch of jobs, and we have 3 tags. And whoops, I accidentally did a person's name instead of a word. I'll fix that. But anyways, 3 tags that each of these jobs are associated with. And we can see those references here. All right, let's fix that real quick. Tag factory. And let's use a dummy word here. All right, PHP artisan migrate fresh -- seed. Reset my migrations, rerun them, and then seed the database. Let's go to Arc, give it a refresh, and now we have actual live data coming from our database. Pretty cool. And then we have 3 tags, and notice every single job is associated with them. Okay, so just a couple final things. I'm going to go into job card and make all of these dynamic. So we'll say job employer name. We want job title, job salary, and then tag. We no longer have to pass this in. And then employer logo, we're going to come back to that. Okay, now let's go to the wide version of the card, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. Job employer. So notice we do have an n+1 issue right now because we haven't eager loaded the employer relationship. So for each item in this loop, we have to perform a new query to fetch the employer. So keep that in mind. Job title, job salary, and same thing here. All right, back to Arc. And now these are unique the way we'd expect. Okay, so the last thing I can fit in here is featured jobs. Right now, we're getting the exact same collection. So notice the first one is psychiatric technician. And then if I come down here to recent jobs, we see the exact same thing. There's no distinction between a featured job and a non or unfeatured job. Let's do this. I'm going to come back to our job seeder. And we know that in some cases we could set featured to false, and other cases featured to true. So I could run 2 separate queries, or this is a slightly more advanced concept, but we could create a sequence instead. And it takes this shape, new sequence. And notice that full import there. I'm going to provide a sequence of parameters that I want Laravel to filter through, or better, iterate through. For example, sometimes featured will be set to false, and why don't we set schedule to full-time? All right, but then in the next iteration, featured will be set to true, and schedule will be set to part-time. All right, so let's reformat. And if we did everything correctly, we should now have, for a total of 20, 10 of them with these attribute overrides set, and another 10 with these attributes. Let's give it a shot. I will run migrate fresh seed. And now check this out. I'm going to go into job controller and let's extract this. Call it jobs. All right. And I'm going to say job all, but after we fetch them, I want to group them according to whether or not they are featured. So check this out. I'm going to return this from the controller so that we can review the JSON. And let's see, let's do pretty print. All right, so notice we have a collection of collections now. So for the first array, in every case, featured is set to 0. But after we get to 10 or so, we get a new array or a new collection. And for this one, featured is set to 1 for all of the items. So we have grouped these into collections based upon whether or not they are featured. Cool. So now here's what we could do. We could, let's do this. We'll have featured jobs as well. So that's the first item from this collection here. And the second item is the unfeatured jobs. So if we want, we could do something like that. All right, so let's go into our view. And now I can loop over featured jobs instead. Okay, so now down here, this will be standard jobs. And you know what? This probably isn't quite right because presumably you would want featured jobs included with your recent jobs. But for now, we're just drawing a distinction between promoted jobs and non-promoted jobs. So as to avoid duplication. Okay, so back to Arc. All right, so now we have our 10 featured jobs, beginning with Human Resource Director, 3, 6, 9, 10. Then our tags, and then unfeatured jobs. And this one is Human Resources Assistant. It's a different collection entirely. Very cool. All right, that's a wrap. And I'm not even joking. I am literally tired right now. There's just so much to cover. And oh my gosh, we only have one more video to do it. So wish me luck. Tomorrow is day 30, and we're going to wrap up this entire course. I'll see you then. What?
Put your arms in the air!
You'll never take me alive! Is this thing running, recording? We're good. I don't know how much time we have. Oh, I need to close those curtains too. They could be here any minute. But I didn't want to leave you hanging. We can't have a 30 days course with only 29 days. So here's the deal. If anybody knocks on your door, we never met. You don't know Laracas. Okay, we may have to go quick, but let's get started. Now, I do have one compromise we need to make in order to fit all of this in to a single video, and I'll show you. Now, here is my Laravel herd root directory, and yeah, you can see pixel positions, but I also have a backup version where I've been working behind the scenes to save us just a little bit of time. So we're going to go into resources, views, components, and just this once, I'm going to ask forgiveness for copying a bunch of form-related components so that I don't have to manually type them out. Trust me, we'll quickly go over it, but you've seen this before, you're already familiar with it. Let's skip over this process. So I will copy this directory, switch back to our real project into resources, views, components, and I will paste it in. And yeah, we'll talk about this more in a moment. Cool. So now let's start with authentication. I'm going to go into my routes file and let's set up our endpoints. And I'm going to do these all at once, again, to save a bit of time. So register will hit how about registered user controller? Again, this is a recap of the authentication episodes. And this will hit a create action. Next, when you post to that endpoint, that will hit a store. So we are storing a new registered user. And of course, ignore the squiggly lines just for a minute. Next, login. So if you make a GET request to login, this will hit, again, auth controller, login controller, session controller, whatever you want. This will hit a create action because we are creating a new session. That's how I think of it. Next, when you post to that endpoint, that will hit a store action. And then finally, let's do a delete request to /logout. And yeah, that will hit a destroy action. All right, let's create these controllers now. PHP artisan, make me a controller called session controller. And let's set up a full resource for it. And then let's do another one, but this time for registered user controller. All right, so yeah, let's import these. And let's start with registration. All right, and later, of course, we will remove any actions that we don't make use of. All right, so this is going to load. How about auth.register? In this case, I'm going to use a different directory name, and that's fine. And also, again, in the spirit of saving time, I'm going to make use of my editor a bit more. So in this case, I can option click and create the view all at once. And you'll see it automatically creates the auth directory and that file. And that's going to help us a lot. All right. So let's create a layout. And yeah, let's start with a page heading. We'll call it register. And yeah, how about font bold? Let's center the text. I want it pretty big, so how about text for Excel? And a little margin below it. Okay, so I can imagine that this is a standard page heading, which means why don't we move it into its own component, like this, page heading.blade.php, and paste it in. All right, now this will be our slot. Cool. So now if I switch back, we can swap it out with page heading. Okay, now I'm going to use some of these form components. So again, yeah, if you take a look at them, you've done these before, right? This is what a button looks like. And mostly we're just extracting Tailwind classes. But we do have a couple of things that might be nice. So I have one component called form. And this will create a form, it adds some default classes, and then it also handles figuring out whether to add the CSRF hidden field and the method field. So notice it defaults to a method of get, but if we change that to post or put or patch, as long as it's not get, it knows that we always need to include these two things, which you learned about in the forms lesson. But yeah, other than that, here's an input. So I create a field, and a field is just a wrapper for an input. It contains a label, it contains the input itself, and it contains an error. You've seen this a million times. And if you want, visit GitHub and you can inspect it and copy it over to your project. Okay, yeah, once again, it's going to save us so much time. Just give me this one. All right, so let's build up our forms. And do note, whenever you have a component within a directory, you need to do the directory name, dot, and then the component name. All right, so the method in this case is going to be post, and the action is going to be register. All right, so first up, I'm going to need an input. And for my inputs, I accept a label and a name, and it takes care of the rest. So the label is going to be your name, and then also the name for the input, which just happens to be name in this case. All right, let me show you what this looks like in the browser. If I visit /register, yeah, there we go. Looks good to me. All right, back to PHP Storm. All right, next, and actually real quick, let's just stick with name. That way this one can be email. Now, in this case, the type for the input should not be text, it should be email. All right, next I want two more. So we will have one for the password, and then also you have to confirm your password. So password confirmation. All right, password, and type for the input is also password, and this is password underscore confirmation, and make sure it takes the same shape. All right, next down at the bottom, we could have a form button, and this could say create account. And let's have a look. Yeah, name, email, password, and create account. But notice there's no padding at the bottom. Maybe I could add a little padding to the body here. I think that's okay. PB10, just to push it down a little bit, and that's fine. Maybe even a little more, actually. Yeah, that's good. Now think about it. When you register, you also need to create an employer. So I have a divider component, and that just creates a little line, as you can see right here. Yeah, just a little divider. And then we're going to have a section for the employer details. For example, let's copy this. I need a name for your employer. So how about employer name? And the name for this input will be employer. And then also we need one for the logo. So I will call that logo. And this is a file input. So I'm going to set type to file in this case. So yeah, notice any attributes I provide here, of course, will be passed through here. And that's how attributes works. In this case, I'm just extracting the defaults into its own array so that it's easier to consume. And that's a good approach you might want to take. All right, back to Arc. So we have all of this and then the employer name and logo. All right, next, as you probably know, anytime you have a form that will accept a file upload, on the form tag itself, you need to set the ink type to multipart / form -data. And that's just how it will be encoded in this situation. Pretty standard HTML stuff there. All right, so let's go to registered user controller. And when we submit that form, we will now hit this endpoint. So let's die and dump all of the request data. All right, magic, I'm going to fill out this form. All right, let's create the account. And there we go, we have our attributes. While we're here, notice that logo is actually an instance of a Laravel class called uploaded file. And you're going to love this. It's going to make it as easy as possible to store this image wherever it needs to go, whether it's publicly available or even uploaded to Amazon S3 or something like that. All right, let's get to work. So this time, why don't we use request not as a helper function, but instead using an object instance like this. So we're going to validate. And by the way, the API is identical. Okay, let's see if my editor can help me a little bit with the rules. We want to save time anywhere that we can. Yeah, it's not perfect, but it'll get us going. Okay, so validate the name, the email verified at is not required, nor is remember token. Password is required, and it should be confirmed. And then I'm going to use the password validation rule. Make sure you don't accidentally grab the password facade. You want illuminate validation rules password, and I'll set, the only requirement is it needs to be at least 6 characters. Next, what else? Email, let's ignore the maximum for now. And it should be unique on the user's table and specifically on the email column. This is actually automatic because it will fetch that from the name. But if you want to be explicit, yeah, this is just saying, hey, look in the user's table and see if there's any email field that has the current email. And if there is, that's a no-go. We can't have 2 users in the system with the exact same email address. It needs to be unique. Okay, but next you'll remember we also have employer-specific validation. So we have a couple options. We could group them all together, or what if we tried this? Let's say user attributes, and then I will do another one for the employer, like this, employer attributes. And this can change to, and actually let's get PHP Storm to do it, some rules for the employer, and yeah, we just need this here. All right, so you have to give us a name, and you have to give us a logo. We'll make that required for now. But also I want to ensure that this logo is in fact an image. For that, I can use a file rule. Illuminate validation rules file. And let's set the available types. And yeah, you can give us a PNG whatever you want here. JPG, WebP, anything you want to add there. Maybe a WebP too, and that'll be enough. Now, here's why we split it up. I can now do things like this. User, create, user attributes. Whereas otherwise I'd have to do something like array accept or something like that to omit these from being passed to user create. And the same for updating the employer. So this just makes it a little bit easier. Create a new user, then log in the user, auth log in the user. And then, let's create the employer. Yeah, we'll do that right here. So we'll say user employer create. And because we are accessing the create method in this way, it will automatically assign the user ID to the employee record. That way I don't have to manually set it. It happens automatically. Now, we could do something like this where we set employer attributes, but in this case, we need to do a bit of work first for the logo. I need to store the logo in the proper location, and then wherever that path is, I want that to be referenced within the employer's table record. So here's what we'll do. Now, you'll remember that the request logo field, when we saw it in the browser, actually was an instance of Laravel's uploaded file class. And that's really cool because now we have some behavior on that class to store the image wherever it needs to go. I'm going to put it in a folder called logos. Okay, let's talk about this. If I go up into my config directory, there is a file systems configuration file. So this is for storage. Do we want to store files locally or with FTP or S3? It just depends on what you want to do. And I can see the settings for each of those disks or drivers here. So in our case, these will be publicly accessible avatars. So I want to use the public disk by default. So I can set that within my environment file. And notice file system disk, I will update this to public. All right. And that's it, believe it or not. You're really going to love this. So when we upload the image, it will be saved within the storage app public, and it will create a new logos folder. And then we will create a symbolic link from here to the public directory so that any person can access these images. That's the way that works. All right. Now, once it uploads the image, it will save a path to where that logo is located. So I can then pass that to our create method. All right, so the employer's name will be employer attributes name, or of course you can grab it right off the request. And then the logo will be, assuming we did everything properly, the logo path. All right, so validate all of the attributes, create a user, store the logo, create a new employer, and then how about redirect to the home page? All right, let me take a look at this. Good, and create. Oh, actually, no. Employer attributes should be employer. That was the name of the input we assigned within the view. Other than that, I think that looks pretty good. All right, so it looks like we have only two actions here. So I can get rid of this and this. And from now on, I will do this behind the scenes after the video, again, to save us a little time. Let's give it a shot. All right, create the account. And it fails. Oh, maybe it wasn't called employer. Let's have a look. Let's go into register. Employer name, employer logo. All right, let's go back to registered user controller. Ah, yes, I bet you saw that. All right, so of course that key wasn't available. All right, try it one more time. All right, and there we go. So I'd like to see a little more feedback, and we can do that through Flash messaging. But if I switch to users, sure enough, I have a new John Doe account. The password is hashed, and we also have an employer who belongs to that user. So I think we're all set for registration. Next, I will switch over to login and log out. So let's go into session controller. For create, this will hit auth.login, and let's create that. All right. So let's steal a little bit of the code here. So this will say login. And this time we will post to login, and there is no file input there. Okay, I think all we need is an email address and a password. All right. How's that look? I think that's right. All right, back to session controller. That will now hit a store action. And you know what? We already wrote this functionality in the authentication episode. So if I switch to GitHub, where we have the source code for the entire series, if I go into app, HTTP, session controller, I bet, yeah, let's take a look at this. It's all the same stuff, right? Show the login view, validate the request. So let's take the raw data here, copy it, and see if we can just paste it in here. All right, so yeah, that looks pretty good. We try to log the user in. If we couldn't, then we attach a validation error to email. We regenerate the session token, as we learned that's a good practice, and then we redirect again to the home page in this case. And then finally for destroy, yeah, you just do auth logout and redirect and you're done. So that saves us a bit of time, which we needed. Let's have a look. Let's go to /login. Let's try to log in john@example.com. And we're in. All right, very cool. But yeah, notice how if I visit /login, I still see that form, which doesn't make sense. So let's do a little bit of authorization. If you think about it, to access this page, you should be a guest. Same for this one, but not for this one. Actually, in this case, you need to be signed in. So let's say middleware auth. And then for these two, and actually also for these two, you need to be a guest. If you're signed in, it doesn't make sense to visit a register page. So I'm going to use a route group, but first add a middleware. And we'll say you got to be a guest in order for this to work. Okay. So now any route nested within this closure will receive the guest middleware. And this is a wrapper, or instead for each of these routes, we could do something like this, and that would do the same thing. All right, very good. Next, let's go into our layout file, and here is our nav section. So yeah, right here, why don't we tweak this? I only want to see this posted job link if you're signed in. So I'm going to use this auth directive, like so. And then I'm going to add another one here called guest. Now I could do auth else and auth, but sometimes I think this reads a little bit better. If you're a guest, show this. If you're signed in, show that. And actually, while we're here, why don't we say job/create for the posted job link, because we know that's what it's going to be ultimately. Okay. Now, if you're instead a guest, let's repeat some of this here. All right, so we will have two links to sign up or log in. All right, so sign up would be /register and login would be /login. Let's have a look. Okay, so if I refresh, yeah, I still see posted job because of course I'm signed in. But let's open up an incognito window. And yeah, now, because we're not signed in, I do see sign up and login, and those do work. Perfect. All right, so let's close those out and I'm back to the view where I'm signed in. All right, 5-second breather, real quick. I get it. I know I'm going really fast. Sorry, it's got to be that way. It's day 30. We got to wrap up. Okay, back to work. What should we work on next? How about this big search bar here? Yeah, okay. Let's go into job/index and let's see what we have. Yeah, right now we have standard form tags, but I'm going to replace this with our new xforms.form tag. And this will make a GET request, which is the default, but I want to send it to, how about search, and we will implement that route. All right, next within here, let's add an input. The name will be Q for query. That's really common. The placeholder can be something like web developer. And let's have a look in the browser. I get undefined variable label. Yeah, so my input component is expecting a label, but in this case, we don't actually want one. So if I switch through, we can see that the label is passed to this field component, and the field component checks whether label is truthy. Okay, so if I switch back, all I need to do is set label to false. All right, switch back, and that solves that problem. Okay, I think I need a little more breathing room below the title. So why don't we say class of MT6? And yeah, we kind of reproduced what we had before. Cool. So now, yeah, take a look. If I search for, how about Laracas, and I hit submit, I do get a 404 because I haven't yet implemented that route. All right, let's do it now. Let's duplicate this. If you visit /search, again, keep it very simple. Let's load a search controller. And actually, this time I'm going to show you invocable controllers. So every once in a while, you will have a controller that will only ever have one action. In these cases, rather than passing an array and the action name, you can just pass the path to the class itself. And then an invoke magic method will be called on that class. It's pretty cool. Let's do that now. PHP artisan, make me a controller called search controller. And oh, you know what? That's interfering with my route declaration. So let's do that first and then uncomment this. Okay, now I can import it and I will command click through. And yeah, if I create a magic __ invoke method, now this will be called. And yeah, this is great for situations where a controller only ever needs to have one action. So I'll show you. Come back, give it a refresh, and we now have hit that invoke method. Okay, so there should be a queue query within the request, refresh, and now that is set to Laracast. And of course, we can control that here. Cool. So now we have everything we need to search our jobs table. And this will be fairly primitive. We're not going to use full text search or anything special. We'll just say, look for any job where the title is like this search param, and that should be enough. So let's say job where the title is like the request query. But then I'm going to say, yeah, any number of characters can come before that query and any number of characters can come after it. So as long as this search query exists somewhere within the title, I want it included in the results set. So we will fetch that. And then why don't we return that as JSON so we can have a look in the browser. Let's start from scratch. Let's look for something related to, how about teacher? All right, we run it. Let's do pretty print and we get one result. All right, so now we just need to render a view to display those results, and that should be pretty easy. Let's return a view, and this could be like a generic view, like results. Anytime you want to show jobs, we can use this view. And I'll pass through our list of jobs. Nice and easy. All right, let's have my editor create the view. We'll have our layout. We will have a page heading, results. And then let's do this. Let's go into job/index. And yeah, we want this right here. So I'm going to copy this and paste it in. And I don't think we need that MT6 in this case. All right. Yeah, let's have a look. Back to the browser, refresh, and we have only one result, but it does seem to be working. Let's try one more time. Something related to tax. And once again, we have one result, but yeah, that's working. Cool. Search is now done. At least the primitive form of search is now complete. We should also look for tags and things like that, but you can work on that on your own. So now think about it. If we go back to our routes file, let's set up another route for tagging. So I could say visit tags / and then some kind of tag name. That will hit a tag controller. And I will create that. So make me a controller called tag controller. Cool. And let's import that. And yeah, this will be the exact same thing. So in fact, if I go to search controller, let's just copy that, switch back to tag, paste it in. And now we aren't searching the database. We are finding all jobs associated with a given tag. Something like that. Okay, so let's go to our tag model. And we don't yet have a relationship between a tag and a job, but I think we do in reverse. Yes. So let's copy this, bring it over to tag, paste it in. And now if I have a tag and I want to find all jobs, it's also a belongs to relationship. We just have to reverse it. Like that. All right, back to tag controller. All right, well now I'm going to ask for the tag. And you learned about this through route model binding. Just as a 5-second recap. Yeah, right here, because we have this wildcard here that's called tag, and then we have a parameter name also of tag, Laravel is going to try to track down this tag for us. But by default, it's going to expect this wildcard to be an ID. So I can add a colon and say, no, actually the identifier here is name. So if I visit tag /front end, yeah, I basically want Laravel to say select star from tags where name equals front end. Yeah, without that, it would default to this. And yeah, we already reviewed this. So that should be a recap. All right. So now I should have the tag. I should be able to get the jobs for the tag, right? So why don't we just do this? Load the results and pass through all of the jobs associated with this particular tag. All right, let's clean up. And it's so easy, isn't it? It kind of blows me away. It's so simple. All right, back to the browser, and let's visit some random tag. How about UT? All right, and here are all of the jobs that are associated with that particular tag. Yeah, cool. So now, yeah, all of these tags should be clickable. So if I click here, that will show me all of the jobs so that I can further filter things down. That's great. Okay, final thing, and then I promise we're going to be done. Of course, we need to implement the form to post a job. So let's do that now. Go to my routes file, and we'll say right up here, how about this? Let's duplicate this. Job/create, we'll hit job controller at create, and then I'll do another one here. When you make a post request to /jobs, that should store a new job in the database. And of course, these need to have the proper middleware. In order to post a job, you need to be signed in. All right, let's take care of it. So we have our create action that will return jobs.create. Let's have my editor create the view. X layout. Notice how quick we can be when we have our systems in order, right? Let's do a page heading, new job, and sanity check. Let's load the page, job/create. That works. And further, if I click right here, it should load it. Cool. Let's build our form. Now, this is going to make a post request to /jobs. And let's do this. Again, I'm going to save ourselves some time. You've already seen the basic process of creating a form input, so I will paste in a few at once. So we have one input for the title and a salary and a location. Next, we need one for the URL. So this is the URL to view the actual job page on your company's website. Next, when you create a job, you can optionally add a number of tags. So I'm going to keep this very simple. It's just an input. And if you provide a comma-separated list, we will turn those into tags. Maybe not ideal, but it'll get the job done in this case. Next, I'm going to have a button to publish the job. And then I'm going to introduce a new one, which is a select field. So if I have a look at it real quick, yeah, notice it's just deferring to an HTML select. All right. So our options are part-time and full-time, and this is where you specify what the schedule for the job is. Next, right down here, let's add it. I'm going to add a checkbox. Once again, input and type equals checkbox. Very basic stuff. Okay. So the label for the checkbox is feature. And cost extra, yeah, presumably if you built this on your own, in order to feature a job, you're going to be charged $100 or $20, whatever it is. We would want to note that. But yeah, we're not going to deal with billing or Stripe in this series. It's far beyond the scope of this course. Anyways, I think that's it. So the only thing I might do is add a divider to separate the main fields from the optional tags. All right, let's have a look in the browser. And here we go. To create a new job, you got to give us all of this junk here, and then you can publish it. All right. So that's going to make a post request to /jobs that will hit our job controller, and that will load this action. Now, you can see here we have a form request. I actually didn't review that in this course. Some people like them, some people don't. I would encourage you to take a look at them. But for now, I'm not going to dig into anything new. So let's stick with the standard Illuminate HTTP request. All right, let's get to work. We will validate the request. Let's see what my editor can do for me. I'm going to add a new job. Yeah, pretty good. I will take care of the employer ID. So you need to give us a title, a salary, a location, a schedule. And then for our demo, at least, we're saying, well, the schedule needs to be either part-time or full-time. So one way we can do that is through the Illuminate Validation Rule class. And I can say it needs to be, the attribute value needs to be included in one of these. And we can also set this up as an enum if we want, but I'm not going to. All right, next step, the URL is required, and it should be a URL. Or if you want to make sure it's an active URL, you could do that as well, which is cool. And then featured, I will handle that a little differently. Finally, we have tags, and we'll keep it here. And let's say tags actually can be nullable. All right, next I will save that to attributes, and then I will manually handle the featured status. So I could say, okay, attributes, add a new one called featured, and that will be true or false depending on whether the request has a value for that featured checkbox. Remember, if that input isn't checked, I don't think anything gets passed, right? But if it is checked, it's set to on or something like that. All I want in this case is a Boolean, so we will use that. All right, this looks good to me. So let's go through the authenticated user. Let's grab the employer. we'll reference the jobs relationship and create a new one there. And again, to be crystal clear, when we take this pathway, when we create the job, the employer ID will automatically be set in the process. And further, when we access the employer through the authenticated user, we remove any opportunity to fake who the current user is. Unless you're signed in, you have no ability to create a job under a different employer. Okay, so it sounds like we just need all of these attributes, maybe except the tags. So here's what I'll do. This time, array except, and I'll provide the attributes and then the one that I want to exclude. We could do that, or we could access it through the request. I think there's a request unless or a request except method as well. So either of those would work. All right, now we have a new job record. The final step is tags. So why don't we do this? Let's see, do we have any tags at all? And what we'll say is if we don't have anything there, let's just assume false. I'm not sure if that's necessary. We might be able to remove that, but I'm going to keep it. Then what I'm going to do is basically explode that list of tags using a comma as a separator, something like this. So now Laravel backend front ends, that will turn into an array, right, of Laravel backend. You get the idea. Let's then loop over it. So for each of those as tag, then let's create a new tag. So I need a job instance. We got it here. And I can say job tag. And yeah, you'll remember using TDD, we implemented this tag method. And this will try to find a tag with the name and attach it. Otherwise, it'll create a brand new tag in the database with that name. So yeah, on this note, keep in mind, this is fairly primitive. We could end up in situations where, for example, you have a tag called front ends in the table, but then this as well. And we should consolidate that as much as we can. But we're going to take a shortcut where we can find it. All right, let's pass it in. And I think we're done. So let's redirect to the home page when we're done. Okay, let's get rid of all of these. And this is our, let's clean this up. This is our job controller. All right, let's go. Post a job. I'll fill this out like magic, like so. All right, so we have a position for a Laracast video editor, pays 90 grand. Here's the link to the work page, and here are some optional tags. Let's publish it. All right, I would expect to see it right here, right? Well, let's see, where is it? It's at the end of recent jobs. Here's what I think I did wrong. Let's go into job controller, and maybe I got the order wrong. Maybe recent jobs is actually first and featured is second. Yeah, I bet that's what I did. Okay, back to Arc, give it a refresh. And again, I don't see it here, but I do see it at the end. Okay, so we just need to reverse the order. Why don't we say the newest jobs show up top? Job, I want the latest ones, and give me the results and group them according to whether they are featured or not. And that should do it. Come back, refresh, and there we go. We have our brand new job. So let's see, can I view all jobs associated with that tag? Yes, I can. Now, I should be able to click on the job and it will take me to the job listing page. Let's fix that, and then I promise we are done. All right, so here is the H3. It's now going to be an anchor tag that links to the job's URL, like so. So let's do the same thing for job card wide, like so. And cross your fingers, refresh, click on this, and it loads the Laracast page where you can view more details. The only thing you might want to do is set a target of blank for both of these. Switch over to this one as well. And that way, some people don't like this, but in this scenario, I think it's okay. That way the user doesn't completely abandon your jobs page. It instead opens the job within a new tab. So again, imagine you're looking for jobs related to video work. All right, here we go. Click on it, and now we can review more. And ladies and gentlemen, that is all I'm going to cover today. Oh, wait, actually, no. I have two more things. Sorry, two more things to show you. We have to update the job card to show the new employer logo. And then I also want to display a logout link and make a couple tweaks to make our query performance better. All right, let's go into employer logo. And yeah, right now we are hard coding the path, but now we can swap it out with the employer logo. Okay, so now let's ask for an employer when you load this component. Okay, I believe we reference it in job card. Yep, let's pass through the employer, job employer. And then I think we do the exact same thing in job card wide. So I will paste that in and remove the width. Okay, so now let's switch into our component, and I'm going to pass this to Laravel's asset function, and that will prepare a full URL to the asset. And remember, when you upload a logo, it goes into the storage app public logos directory. So here's one of the logos I uploaded. And now all you have to do is symlink it into your public folder, which is globally accessible. So for that, you can say PHP artisan storage link. All right, so now notice we have a symbolic link right here. Yeah, there it is. And now they're accessible. All right, let's go to Arc, and we see it, but the size is wrong. All right, let's go into employer logo. And yep, we accept a width, but we never used it. So let's do that now. Come back, and that looks good to me. All right, next, let's go into Job Controller, and remember to always optimize your queries. If we have a job and we're going to access tags and employer information off it, if we're not careful, that's going to lead to an n+1 problem, as we learned about. So let's always use the with method to eager load any relationships we require, such as employer and tags. And yeah, you would also do the same thing, for example, in Search Controller. So make sure you say with employer and tags and whatever else you happen to reference. And when these queries get a little long, yeah, make sure you can put them on their own line. And if you want, you can even call this query method to start a new query, and that allows you to keep all of your primary filter methods on their own lines, and that does the same thing. All right, last thing, and then I promise this time I'm letting you go. If we switch to Arc, yes, we have sign up and log in, but if I log in as John, there's no link to log out. So that's my final step. If you're signed in, I'm going to add a form to log out. That'll hit the logout endpoint, and it's going to make a post request. But of course, we need to add the CSRF and method tags. And yeah, we're not using the form component because that has some styling for the form itself and the button. And we don't need that in this case. Okay. So yeah, now let's do a display of flex. And yeah, it looks good to me. So I can post a job or I can log out. And this time, ladies and gentlemen, I'm done. I can't do any more in this course. Well, I can't believe it, but we are now officially, positively, undeniably, indisputably, irreversibly done with 30 days to learn Laravel. It has been a massive effort for both you and me. So if you have made it through all of these 30 days, trust me, I've watched a lot of courses myself, and rarely do I complete them. So whether you intended it or not, I'm going to take that as a compliment. All right, so let's talk about this. Come here. I have recorded iterations of this course for about 10 years now. It goes all the way back to 2013 with Laravel 3 from scratch, if you can believe it. And yeah, it never fails. Every single time, people will complain that we didn't cover such and such topic. You know, there's nothing here about package development. What about APIs? What about events? You didn't talk about Livewire or inertia. How come? And I'm going to tell you the answer to that question right now. The reason is because we didn't.
Well, okay.
You know, as the saying goes, your learning doesn't conclude the moment you finish a beginner-related course. I'm sorry to say, it has only just begun. So yes, I would encourage you to learn more about Livewire, and we have a course for that on Laracast. Yes, you should learn more about API development, and we have a course for that. Yes, you should learn more about Inertia.js, and we have a course for that. But do they belong in a beginner-specific course? Well, that's up for you to decide, but I chose no. There is such a thing as giving people too much all at once, and I would rather you complete a course and then move on versus become overwhelmed by the material in one course. Okay, so this is somewhat of a bittersweet moment for me because I know most of you are watching this as a free course, maybe even on YouTube, and you're never going to sign up for Laracast. Even though, did you know that you can sign up for Laracast for $15 a month? $15. I went to Subway yesterday and it was $15. You could access everything we have ever created for $15 a month. But I already know most of you won't. Some of you will, and I immensely appreciate it, but most of you won't. You'll finish this video, you're probably already done. You're probably not even listening to me at this point. You've already moved on to something else, and we'll never see each other again. And that is a bittersweet moment. So, I'm going to finish up with a song to show you how I feel when you don't sign up for Laracast. Let me show you. Oh my God, they're here. Wish me luck.